The first thing that seems impossible is not the stone itself, but the silence around it. A block lies half buried in an ancient quarry, longer than a house, heavier than anything a small village should ever have imagined moving. Another stands upright in a sacred circle, its surface weathered by thousands of winters, its origin traced to hills many miles away. Far across the world, a stone head gazes over an island of grass and volcanic rock, its back turned to the sea, its face carved with the calm expression of something that has watched generations vanish. In the mountains, walls made from giant stones hold together so tightly that the joints seem less assembled than grown. In deserts, on ridges, beside rivers, under ruined temples, these stones remain where ancient hands left them, and their weight presses not only on the ground, but on the imagination. They are not impossible in the sense that they could not have been moved. That is where the mystery often becomes distorted. They are impossible because they force the modern mind to slow down and measure ancient ambition on a scale it rarely expects. Many of these stones were cut, dragged, raised, balanced, polished, and fitted long before engines, steel cables, hydraulic cranes, or modern survey instruments. Some were moved before iron tools became common. Some were raised by societies that left no long technical manuals behind. Some were shaped by people whose names are lost completely, whose languages are gone, whose songs, commands, jokes, injuries, rivalries, and rituals disappeared into dust. What survives in the record suggests not magic, but something almost as difficult to comprehend: human coordination sustained over years, sometimes generations, by belief strong enough to make stone travel. The landscape around these monuments is part of the evidence. A standing stone is never only an object. It belongs to a path from quarry to monument, from hillside to ceremonial ground, from rough extraction to final placement. The journey begins in bedrock, where a seam of suitable stone catches the attention of builders who understand the land with precision learned over a lifetime. It continues through the quarry floor, where marks from tools may remain like old scars. It crosses ground that must be cleared, levelled, wetted, hardened, or avoided. It passes through seasons, because mud, frozen earth, floodwater, dry grass, and river currents can all become part of the machine. It ends at a place chosen not at random but because it matters: a tomb, a temple, a ridgeline, a sacred island platform, a royal complex, a circle aligned to sky and horizon, a wall meant to outlast fear. To stand before such stones is to feel the gap between evidence and experience. Archaeology can measure dimensions. Geology can identify source rock. Experiments can test sledges, ropes, ramps, levers, rollers, wooden tracks, lubricated clay, packed earth, river barges, and teams of pullers. All of this brings the problem down from myth into human scale. Yet even after the numbers are calculated, a harder question remains. How did communities decide that this was worth doing? A stone weighing tens or hundreds of tons is not moved casually. It demands food, leadership, planning, replacement tools, trained bodies, shared timing, and a reason powerful enough to gather people into the same exhausting act. The mystery is not just how the stone moved. The mystery is why so many ancient worlds chose to move it at all. Across history, heavy stone appears again and again at turning points in human society. It marks graves when the dead become ancestors whose memory must be fixed in the ground. It marks temples when gods are imagined as needing houses that ordinary time cannot easily destroy. It marks kingship when rulers use weight, height, and permanence to make authority visible. It marks communities before kings, too, when villagers cooperate on monuments that may have held seasonal gatherings, rituals, feasts, burials, or claims to land. Scholars still debate many of these purposes, especially where no writing survives, but the pattern is clear enough. Stone gives human intention a body. It makes a belief difficult to ignore. The word impossible often enters the story because the finished monument hides the process that created it. A raised obelisk does not show the ropes that strained around it. A pyramid does not preserve every ramp used to build it. A megalithic circle does not replay the days when people dragged stones through wet fields or over timber tracks. An Inca wall does not reveal every stage of quarrying, rough shaping, transport, trial fitting, and final dressing, when the scaffolds rot, when ramps erode, when wooden sledges decay, when workers' camps vanish under later soil. The monument becomes strangely detached from the labour that made it. The result looks sudden, almost supernatural, because the slow machinery of human effort has disappeared. This disappearance has always invited stories. In many places, later generations explained ancient stones through giants, gods, demons, legendary kings, lost races, or travellers from beyond the ordinary world. These stories are not worthless. They show that even people living much closer to the monument sometimes found them difficult to explain. A medieval farmer looking at a stone circle might not know the Neolithic world that raised it. A later shepherd crossing a ruined platform might have no memory of the chiefdom that carved it. A village built beside an ancient quarry might inherit the stone without inheriting the method. When technical memory breaks, myth often grows in the crack. Modern myths do something similar, though they wear different clothing. They speak of vanished super-civilizations, secret technologies, levitation, or visitors from the stars. These ideas can be tempting because they offer a clean answer where the real evidence is incomplete. They also flatter the monument by making it seem too grand for ordinary humans, but they often do so by shrinking the ancient builders themselves. The stronger story is not that ancient people needed impossible powers. It is that they possessed social, practical, and environmental intelligence that modern people often underestimate. They knew how to organize bodies, read materials, use patience as a tool, and turn simple machines into astonishing results. Still, rejecting unsupported theories does not erase the real mysteries. No single explanation fully accounts for every stone, every site, every method, every local solution. The way Egyptians moved an obelisk is not identical to the way Pacific Islanders moved a statue, and neither is the same as the way Andean builders maneuvered stone through mountain terrain. Even within one civilization, methods changed across time and according to the task. A river barge solves one problem and creates another. A ramp can raise a block but also demands enormous construction. Rollers work well on some ground and poorly on others. Sledges need ropes, teams, and surfaces that reduce friction. Levers can lift, nudge, and adjust, but only through repeated, careful movements. The evidence remains incomplete because the most important parts of ancient engineering were often temporary. The most haunting stones are the ones that were never finished. In quarries from Egypt to the Levant and beyond, abandoned blocks still lie attached to the earth, as if the builders stepped away for a moment and never returned. These unfinished stones are rare gifts because they catch the process before it disappears. They show tool marks, extraction channels, cracks, mistakes, ambitions interrupted by flaws in the rock or changes in power. An unfinished monument is honest in a way a completed monument is not. It reveals that ancient builders miscalculated, adapted, failed, and abandoned work when stone resisted them. The impossible stones were not produced by perfect methods. They were produced by people willing to wrestle with imperfection at immense scale. Imagine the first day of such a project before the monument exists, when the chosen stone is still part of a hillside. There is no glory yet. There is only planning, dust, heat or cold, the scrape of tools, the judgment of experienced eyes, and the knowledge that one mistake can waste months of labour. Someone must decide where to cut. Someone must understand how the stone will fracture. Someone must think ahead to the route, the slope, the riverbank, the final platform. The builders are not moving a dead object. They are negotiating with weight, grain, weather, and time. The stone is passive, but it is never easy. Then the human world gathers around it. Food arrives for workers, ropes are twisted, timber is cut or reused, paths are prepared, leaders give orders, but leadership alone does not move stone. The bodies doing the work must act together. Pull too soon, and the rhythm fails. Pull unevenly, and the block shifts dangerously. Let the surface dry or break, and friction becomes an enemy. A stone of great size can injure without malice. It can crush a foot, snap a rope, slide at the wrong moment, trap a hand, or halt a procession for days. What survives in the record rarely preserves these accidents, but they must have happened. Every ancient monument has a hidden history of strain, and yet the stones moved. That is the fact at the centre of the mystery. They moved across deserts and plains, across islands and river valleys, from quarries to sacred enclosures, from mountainsides to royal centres, from rough earth into carefully planned positions. They moved because ancient societies learned that power could be made visible through permanence. They moved because the dead needed houses, gods needed thresholds, rulers needed symbols, and communities needed places where memory could gather. They moved because human beings, long before modern machines, discovered that many small forces acting together could produce something that looked impossible from a distance. The story of the ancient builders who moved impossible stones is therefore not a story about one secret method hidden in the past. It is a story about many solutions, many landscapes, many kinds of belief, and many forms of labour. It begins with the shock of scale, but it does not end there. The real path leads downward into quarries, outward across transport routes, upward along ramps and walls, and inward into the social worlds that made such effort meaningful. The stones still stand because the builders understood something simple and severe: a human life is brief. But a stone can carry intention far beyond the hands that shaped it. Before machines, before iron, before the world learns to measure power through engines and steel, stone already has a way of humbling human beings. It waits in the hillside with no urgency. It does not care whether a village is hungry, whether a ruler is impatient, whether a priest has promised a ceremony at sunrise, or whether the workers below are already exhausted. To move it, ancient builders need more than strength. They need a whole system of knowledge that does not look dramatic from far away, but becomes extraordinary when placed against the weight of the task. They need wood, fibre, mud, water, fire, stone tools, copper tools in some places, bronze in others, muscle, mathematics of the practical kind, and an understanding of the land that comes from watching it season after season. The ancient world does not lack technology. It simply has technology that is easy for later ages to overlook because so much of it rots, washes away, or leaves only faint marks in the earth. This is one of the first mistakes modern observers often make. They imagine ancient builders standing helpless before huge stones with nothing but bare hands and superstition. The record suggests something very different. Even societies without iron could be highly skilled at solving physical problems. They knew how to split rock along natural weaknesses, how to shape surfaces by repeated blows, how to use harder stone against softer stone, how to polish by abrasion, how to twist plant fibres into strong rope, how to build sledges that spread weight, how to reduce friction with wet clay or prepared tracks, and how to use gravity without being destroyed by it. Much of this knowledge was not written down because it did not need to be written down. It lived in craft, repetition, apprenticeship, and memory. A quarry worker learned from someone older. A rope maker knew which fibres failed under strain. A carpenter understood how wood behaved when dry, wet, bent, or loaded. A foreman could read the angle of a slope as carefully as a later engineer reads a plan. The absence of iron is important, but it is not the same as the absence of capability. Iron tools are hard, durable, and useful, yet many of the most famous stone-moving achievements begin in periods when iron is not yet available or not widely used. Egyptians quarry and shape vast stones with stone hammers, copper chisels, wooden wedges, and abrasive sand. Neolithic communities in Europe raised megaliths with stone, timber, rope, and coordinated labour in the Andes. Builders work with stone hammers and bronze or copper alloy tools in some contexts, but their greatest advantage is not a single cutting edge. It is the ability to organise stone fitting through patience and repeated adjustment. Scholars still debate the exact tool sequences at many sites, and the evidence remains incomplete, but the broad pattern is clear. Ancient construction is rarely a matter of one miraculous invention. It is usually a chain of small, practical solutions, each one making the next possible. Wood is one of the quiet heroes of this story, even though it is often missing when archaeologists arrive. A monument made of stone survives, but the timber that helped raise it decays. The rollers, levers, sledges, frames, rails, braces, wedges, scaffolds, and hauling devices often vanish completely unless rare conditions preserve them. This creates a strange illusion. The stone remains alone, as though it moved alone. Yet in many ancient landscapes, wood must have been essential. A lever is just a length of timber placed with intelligence. A sledge is wood shaped to carry weight over ground. A ramp may be earth, rubble, brick, and timber combined. A lifting frame may leave almost nothing behind. Even when rollers were not always practical for very heavy loads or uneven terrain, wooden elements still mattered in controlling movement, protecting surfaces, and distributing force. What survives in the record suggests that ancient engineering depended not only on stonecutters, but on forests, carpenters, and people who understood the limits of organic material. Rope is another vanished technology that deserves more attention. To say that a stone was pulled by ropes can sound simple until the scale is considered. Ropes must be made from available fibres, twisted evenly, tested under load, protected from abrasion, and replaced before they fail. A snapped rope under tension is not merely an inconvenience. It can injure workers, ruin timing, or allow a heavy block to lurch dangerously. Ancient rope making is not primitive. It is a technical craft. In Egypt, ropes made from plant fibres are known from archaeological contexts. In many other cultures, fibres from grasses, bark, flax, hemp, reeds, or other plants can be turned into lines strong enough for hauling when made correctly and used in groups. The builders do not need one impossible rope. They need many adequate ropes, arranged carefully, pulled in rhythm, and managed by people who understand strain through experience. The ground itself becomes part of the machine. This is a crucial idea. Modern people often think of machines as separate objects, built from metal and powered by fuel or electricity. Ancient builders often turn the environment into the machine. A slope can become a ramp, a river can become a transport highway, wet clay can become a friction reducer, frozen ground, in colder regions, can help support loads, flood seasons can lift barges closer to construction areas, packed earth can spread pressure under a sledge, sand can be a problem when dry and loose, but more manageable when dampened in the right way. The exact methods vary from place to place, and no single explanation fully accounts for every project. Yet the principle repeats across the ancient world. The builders are not simply fighting nature, they are recruiting it. This kind of knowledge takes time to develop. It begins long before the largest monuments. People learn to move smaller stones first. They build houses, tombs, walls, terraces, platforms, burial chambers, and boundary markers. They discover which rocks crack badly and which hold a clean edge. They learn that a block too thin may break, a block too thick may never move, a route too steep can become fatal, and a foundation too soft will betray the entire project. By the time a society attempts truly massive stones, it usually has generations of smaller experiments behind it. The final monument may look sudden to later eyes, but it is often the visible peak of a long technological tradition. The tools themselves can seem modest. Hammerstones, pounders, picks, chisels, wedges, wooden mallets, antler picks in some prehistoric European contexts, stone mauls, copper saws aided by abrasive sand, plumb lines, measuring cords, levels made from water or simple sighting methods, baskets for carrying rubble, sledges, and levers. None of these looks impressive in isolation. A hammerstone is only a stone in the hand, a cord is only twisted fibre, a wedge is only a shaped piece of wood driven into a crack, but combined with time, organisation, and repetition, they become powerful. This is the hidden arithmetic of ancient construction. One blow does little. 10,000 blows change a surface. One person cannot drag a megalith. Hundreds pulling together can make it creep across the earth. One lever lift is tiny. Repeated lifts, blocked carefully with wedges, can raise a weight that appears immovable. It is easy to forget how much ancient engineering depends on rhythm. Work songs are rarely preserved in the archaeological record, but coordinated labour often needs sound, gesture, or repeated command. A team pulling a sledge must act as one body. Quarry workers striking a surface must avoid interfering with one another. Builders levering a stone into position must understand sequence. In societies with no written engineering manual surviving, the body becomes the archive. Hands learn what eyes cannot fully describe. Shoulders learn when a load begins to shift. Feet learn how the ground responds. The experience of movement passes through muscle memory. The evidence remains incomplete because such knowledge leaves few direct traces, but the finished stones imply that it existed. Leadership matters as well, though not always in the same form. Some projects are clearly tied to states with rulers, administrators, food stores, labour taxes, and specialists. Others belong to communities without kings in the later sense, where shared ritual or seasonal gathering may have organised effort. In both cases, moving stone requires social agreement or social control, sometimes both. People must be fed while they work. Tools must be made before they are needed. Routes must be prepared. Tasks must be divided between quarry crews, transport crews, builders, planners, cooks, rope makers, woodcutters, and ritual specialists. A stone monument is never only the work of those who touch the stone. It is the work of an entire support system. Food is part of the engineering. This may sound plain, but it is fundamental. Heavy labour consumes bodies quickly. Workers need grain, meat, or fish where available, beer or other fermented drinks in some cultures, water, salt, and rest. A monument can therefore reveal agricultural capacity as much as technical skill. To move a massive block, a society must produce enough surplus to release people from ordinary tasks. Even briefly, it must transport provisions, manage storage, and survive the interruption to daily life. What appears to be an engineering mystery is also an economic mystery. The stone moves only because fields, herds, boats, kitchens, and storehouses move with it. The surprising detail is that ancient builders often did not need to move as much stone as legends imagine in a single moment. Many projects were broken into stages. A block might be roughly shaped at the quarry to reduce weight before transport. A route might be prepared in sections. A stone might be moved a short distance, stabilised, then moved again. A monument might rise over years. With labour concentrated during seasons when farming demands were lower, or when environmental conditions were favourable. The spectacle of the final object hides this patience. The impossible becomes more possible when it is divided into thousands of controlled actions. Yet there is still no reason to make the ancient world too neat. Mistakes happen, stones crack at the wrong time, ramps slump, wood shortages complicate plans, ropes wear out, political leaders die, ritual priorities change, floods arrive too high or too low. A project that begins under one generation may be completed under another, altered, abandoned, or repurposed. Unfinished stones and incomplete monuments remind us that ancient builders are not superhuman. They work with limits. Their greatness comes from operating within those limits rather than floating above them. Before iron, before engines, before cranes, ancient builders learned to multiply force through organisation. They used simple machines, but not simple minds. They read stone, wood, water, ground, season, and human effort as parts of one system. The monuments they leave behind seem to ask for a lost secret, but the deeper answer is more demanding. There may be no single secret. There may only be skill layered upon skill, memory passed through hands, and societies willing to spend enormous effort on things they believed must outlast them. The stones are heavy, but the heavier achievement is the world of knowledge required to make them move. The journey of an impossible stone begins before anyone pulls a rope. It begins in a place where the earth has already done most of the ancient work, deep in the slow violence of geology. Long before a quarry crew arrives, heat, pressure, sediment, lava, minerals, buried seas, uplifted mountains, and cracked bedrock have prepared the material. A builder does not create granite, limestone, sandstone, basalt, or volcanic tuff. A builder finds it, tests it, listens to its behaviour under the tool, and decides whether it can become something more than landscape. This first act is quiet, almost invisible in the finished monument, but it may be the most important decision of all. Choose the wrong stone, and every later effort is wasted. Ancient quarries are not empty holes where people simply removed blocks. They are records of judgment. On their surfaces are extraction trenches, tool marks, abandoned roughouts, broken blocks, ramps, working floors, piles of chips, and sometimes the ghostly outline of stones that were meant to leave but never did. To enter such a quarry is to step into the workshop behind the miracle. The monument may stand miles away, polished and sacred, but the quarry is more intimate. It shows where the builders argued with the rock itself. It shows where they made choices that were practical rather than ceremonial. This seam is clean, that vein is flawed, this face can be cut, that fracture may betray the whole piece. What survives in the record suggests that experienced quarry workers understood stone not as a lifeless mass, but as a material with habits. The location of a quarry could shape an entire project. Some monuments use stone from nearby outcrops, which reduced transport difficulty but still demanded planning. Others drew material from astonishing distances, either because the desired stone had a special appearance, special strength, or special meaning. Egyptian builders used local limestone for much pyramid masonry, finer limestone from Tura for casing and some monuments, granite from Aswan for chambers, obelisks, statues, and architectural elements and other stones from desert quarries across the Nile Valley and beyond. At Stonehenge, some smaller bluestones came from Western Wales, a fact that has made the monument one of the most debated stone transport stories in Europe. In the Andes, builders often used stones from nearby quarries but still faced punishing terrain, steep slopes, and complex routes. The evidence remains incomplete in many places. Yet the distance between quarry and monument often reveals that stone was chosen for more than convenience. In some landscapes, the quarry itself may have held meaning. A stone taken from a particular mountain, river valley, volcanic slope, or ancestral land could carry identity with it. This is especially important in prehistoric contexts where writing does not explain motives. A community may not have selected a difficult source merely because it lacked easier stone. The stone may have mattered because of where it came from, because of its colour, texture, sound when struck, relationship to the horizon, or connection to memory and ritual. Scholars still debate these possibilities, and caution is necessary, but practical and symbolic reasons do not exclude each other. Ancient people could care about the physical quality of stone and its sacred geography at the same time. Quarrying begins by exposing the shape of possibility. Workers remove weathered surface material, clear debris, and identify natural bedding planes or fractures. In softer stones, cutting channels around a block may be enough to define it. In harder stones, repeated pounding with stone walls can slowly separate material. Wooden wedges may be driven into cracks and soaked so that swelling wood helps open the fracture, though the usefulness of this method depends on the stone and situation. In Egypt, pounding stones made of harder rock were used to work granite, leaving rounded tool marks that can still be studied. Copper tools could cut softer limestone more easily, especially when combined with abrasive sand. But copper alone does not slice through hard stone like a modern steel blade. The work is slower, harsher, and more repetitive than the finished monument suggests. The sound of a quarry must have been relentless, not one dramatic blow, but thousands of impacts. Stone against stone, wood against wedge, baskets scraping against rubble, feet shifting over dust. The air would carry grit, hands would blister and scar. The workers would learn to read small changes, a slightly different ring from the rock, a new hairline crack, a tool bouncing differently against a surface. Such details could decide whether a block survived extraction. The people doing this work were not guessing blindly. They may not have used modern geological language, but they understood behaviour through contact. The stone taught them, and the cost of misunderstanding was heavy. Some of the most revealing ancient stones are those abandoned in the quarry. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan is a famous example, still attached to the bedrock, its immense body outlined by trenches. It appears almost ready to emerge, but a crack made it useless for its intended purpose. That crack is a rare moment of honesty from the past. It shows that ambition could exceed the stone's tolerance. It shows that even expert builders could be defeated by flaws hidden until late in the work. It also reveals the scale of effort invested before abandonment. The quarry was not a place of perfect certainty. It was a place where failure could become monumental. Other abandoned stones tell similar stories across different cultures. Blocks left beside ancient routes may have cracked during transport. Rough statues may have been stopped before final carving. Foundation stones may remain where a project changed direction. These unfinished works are often more valuable to understanding technique than completed monuments, because they preserve stages normally erased by success. A polished wall hides the blows that shaped it. A standing monolith hides the extraction bed. A finished statue hides the bulky rough form that once protected fragile features during transport. The incomplete object still carries the fingerprints of process. The act of reducing weight was itself a calculation. Builders often shaped stones at the quarry before moving them, but not always to their final form. Too much shaping could make a block fragile. Too little shaping could make it unnecessarily heavy. A statue might be roughed out near its source, leaving extra stone around delicate areas until it reached a safer place for finishing. A building block might be trimmed enough to remove waste but left with margins for later fitting. The quarry crew therefore had to imagine the future object inside the rough mass, while also thinking about the violence of transport. A stone was not simply cut free, it was prepared for a journey. That journey required access. A quarry without a route is only a scar in the earth. Ancient workers had to create paths wide enough and stable enough for stone movement. In some places, quarry roads remain as traces across desert surfaces or hillsides. In others, they have vanished under later farming, settlement, erosion, or vegetation. These routes may include cleared tracks, ramps, causeways, or temporary surfaces. The ground had to bear weight without swallowing the load. Curves had to be managed, slopes had to be softened or used carefully. A block could not simply be dragged wherever people wished. The landscape negotiated every step. Quarries also depended on support settlements, even if temporary. Workers needed shelter, water, food, tool repair, rope maintenance, and supervision. Some quarry zones show evidence of camps or administrative activity. In state societies, officials may have recorded labour, rations, and deliveries, though much of this documentation is uneven or lost. In smaller communities, organisation may have been more seasonal and communal, tied to gathering times or ritual obligations. No single model explains all ancient quarrying, yet everywhere, the extraction of great stones implies a world beyond the visible cut. Someone fed the workers, someone replaced broken tools, someone decided when work began and when it stopped. The surprising truth is that quarrying could be more technically demanding than transport or construction, because it set the limits for everything that followed. A badly chosen block could fracture on the road, a poorly cut surface could waste labour during fitting, a hidden flaw could destroy months of effort. Ancient builders had to begin with uncertainty and reduce it through experience. They could not scan the stone with modern instruments. They could only observe, strike, listen, and interpret. What survives in the record suggests a refined practical science, one built from generations of trial, failure, memory, and adaptation. This makes the quarry a sacred beginning even when it was not formally sacred. It is the place where landscape becomes intention. The stone is still earth, but already marked by human purpose. Around it gather the first signs of the future monument, the channel line, the hammer mark, the cleared track, the rough face emerging from bedrock. The quarry shows that impossible stones did not appear as finished wonders. They were born through dust, judgment, noise, and risk. Long before a crowd saw a monolith rise or a wall lock into place, the builders had already faced the oldest question in stonework, whether the mountain would allow a piece of itself to leave. Once the stone leaves the quarry, the mystery changes shape. Extraction is a struggle against the body of the earth, but transport is a struggle against distance. A block that seems barely possible to free from bedrock becomes even more intimidating when it must cross a slope, a valley, a riverbank, a desert track, a forest path, or a ceremonial route prepared for a destination still far away. The stone is no longer protected by the mountain. It has become a dangerous traveller. Every movement must be planned because weight does not forgive carelessness. A heavy block can stop in soft ground, slide too quickly downhill, crush its own support, snap ropes, damage sledges, or turn slightly out of line and become harder to correct than to move. The journey from quarry to monument is where ancient engineering becomes a test of patience more than spectacle. The simplest image is a group of people pulling a stone, but even that image hides many layers. Before a team pulls, someone must decide the route. The shortest path is rarely the best path. A direct line may cross marshy soil, steep drops, loose sand, thick vegetation, uneven rock, or sacred land that cannot be disturbed. Ancient builders often needed a route that was longer but safer, one that followed natural contours, used firm ground, approached rivers at useful angles, or avoided slopes where a block could escape control. What survives in the record suggests that transport was not one heroic effort, but a sequence of small victories clearing, levelling, hauling, resting, adjusting, and hauling again. Sledges are among the most practical answers to the problem. A sledge spreads the weight of a stone across a broader surface and allows it to be dragged without the block itself digging directly into the ground. In Egypt, images and physical evidence support the use of sledges for heavy objects, including statues. The famous scene of a large statue being pulled on a sledge, with a person pouring liquid in front of it, is often discussed because it shows that reducing friction was part of the operation. Wetting sand or prepared ground can make hauling easier under the right conditions, though the exact effect depends on moisture, surface, load, and sand type. This is not a miracle technique, it is a controlled improvement. Ancient builders did not need friction to vanish. They needed it reduced enough for human teams to keep the object moving. Rollers are another popular idea, but they are not a universal solution. Wooden rollers can help move loads on firm, level ground, especially when weight is manageable and the route is prepared. But very heavy stones can crush rollers, sink them into soft soil, or become unstable on uneven terrain. Rollers also require large amounts of suitable timber, which may not be available everywhere, in some landscapes. Dragging on sledges over lubricated or prepared surfaces may have been more reliable than rolling. Scholars still debate the use of rollers at specific sites, and the evidence remains incomplete because wood rarely survives. The important point is that ancient builders probably used different methods for different conditions rather than relying on a single universal device. Ropes turn many bodies into one force, but only if coordination is maintained. 100 people pulling without rhythm may waste strength. A smaller group pulling together at the right moment can be more effective. The command structure may have included signals, chants, drum beats, gestures, or experienced leaders placed along the rope lines. Direct evidence for the sound of this work is usually gone, but the need for coordination is clear. Heavy transport is not just about raw muscle. It is about timing. If the stone begins to move, the team must keep it moving steadily. If it stops, restarting can require even greater effort. If it moves too fast, control becomes danger. This balance between motion and restraint is one of the least visible skills of ancient transport. The surface under the stone could be engineered with surprising care. A path might be packed with clay, covered with wooden planks, reinforced with rubble, smoothed with sand, or dampened before hauling. In some cases, temporary roads may have been built only to disappear later through erosion or reuse. In wetter climates, builders might take advantage of firm seasonal ground or frozen surfaces in dry regions. They might work during periods when river levels allowed easier loading or when heat was less punishing. Ancient labour calendars were often shaped by agriculture, flood cycles, and ritual schedules. A stone did not move whenever someone wished. It moved when land, workers, food supply, and social pressure aligned. Rivers were among the greatest ancient machines. Where geography allowed, water could carry weights that land transport made painful. Egyptian builders made extensive use of the Nile and its canals for moving stone over long distances. Blocks quarried far to the south could travel by boat to construction zones downstream or upstream depending on conditions. Current, wind, towing, and sailing arrangements. This does not make the problem easy. Loading a heavy stone onto a barge is itself difficult. The vessel must be strong enough, balanced properly, and brought close enough to the quarry or construction site. Riverbanks, harbours, canals, and causeways become essential parts of the transport system. Yet water changes the scale of possibility. A stone that would take enormous effort to drag across hundreds of miles of land may become manageable once floated. Still, every transfer between land and water is a dangerous threshold. A block must be hauled down to a loading area, positioned, perhaps lifted or slid onto a vessel, secured, transported, unloaded, and then moved again on land. Each stage can fail, a barge can ground, a ramp can collapse, a stone can shift and threaten the balance of the craft. No single explanation fully accounts for the success of ancient river transport, because each site has its own conditions. But the repeated use of waterways shows that ancient builders understood logistics at a scale far beyond the romantic image of isolated workers dragging stones through dust. In places without useful rivers, builders adapted differently. On islands, stone might be moved from volcanic quarries across rolling ground, coastal paths, or prepared roads. In mountains, movement could follow ridges, terraces, or switchback routes. In forested regions, timber might be abundant but the terrain difficult. In open plains, distance might be easier, but visibility, weather, and social control more important. The method belongs to the landscape. This is why the story of impossible stones cannot be reduced to one lost trick. The same basic principles appear again and again, but every ancient project is a local negotiation with gravity. Downhill movement was especially dangerous. Modern observers may assume that descending is easier because gravity helps, but gravity can help too much. A heavy stone sliding downhill can become uncontrollable. Ancient builders needed braking systems, ropes behind the load, wooden chocks, side guides, retaining banks, angled routes, and teams assigned not to pull but to restrain. The goal was not simply to move the stone, but to prevent it from moving in the wrong way. In some cases, dragging uphill may have been safer than descending steeply because effort could be controlled more predictably. The evidence remains incomplete, but the physics is plain. The ancient world did not merely need power, it needed restraint. The most surprising part of transport is how slow it may have been. A stone could advance only a short distance in a day, especially if the route was difficult. Progress might pause for repairs, ceremonies, weather, injuries, food distribution, or route preparation. A modern machine can make slowness seem like failure, but for ancient builders, slowness was often the method. The stone creeps forward, and each small movement is secured before the next. A few inches matter, a turn is an event. A slope is a campaign. A journey that looks impossible from the monument becomes imaginable when broken into hundreds or thousands of measured efforts. There must also have been moments of public drama. A great stone moving through a landscape is not an ordinary sight. People may have gathered to watch, to help, to sing, to perform rituals, or simply to witness a community doing something beyond daily life. The transport route could become ceremonial before the monument was complete. The stone's journey may have been part of its meaning. It passed through land, labour, and memory, gathering importance as it moved. Scholars still debate how much ritual surrounded transport in different cultures, but it is difficult to believe that such immense movements were always treated as mere construction. By the time the stone reaches its destination, it has already become more than material. It carries the quarry, the route, the workers, the broken tools, the repaired ropes, the cleared paths, the shouted commands, the moments when it refused to move, and the moments when it finally shifted. The finished monument hides this journey, but the journey is the achievement. The ancient builders who moved impossible stones did not defeat distance in a single act. They turned distance into a process. They made the land itself participate. They used sledges, ropes, rivers, ramps, timing, patience, and human rhythm until the impossible thing advanced, slowly, stubbornly, toward the place where memory wanted it to stand. In Egypt, stone becomes a language of permanence. It rises from the desert edge in pyramids, temples, obelisks, statues, causeways, tomb walls, and polished chambers where rulers try to bind their names to eternity. Few ancient cultures leave behind such an overwhelming record of stone ambition, and few have been surrounded by so many myths because of it. The monuments appear so clean against the sky that their construction seems almost unreal. A pyramid's outline hides the quarry scars. An obelisk's height hides the trench where it was born. A granite sarcophagus hides the abrasive labour that shaped it grain by grain. Egypt makes stone look inevitable, as though the desert itself decided to become architecture. Yet Egyptian stonework is not mysterious because evidence is absent. It is mysterious because the evidence is vast, varied, and still incomplete in the places modern curiosity most wants certainty. Archaeologists have quarries, tool marks, worker settlements, administrative records, ramps at some sites, unfinished stones, transport scenes, inscriptions, and surviving monuments in every stage of decay. What they do not have is one complete instruction manual explaining every method for every period. Egyptian building spans thousands of years, techniques change, political needs change, materials change, the scale of royal ambition rises and falls. No single explanation fully accounts for all Egyptian stone movement, and that is precisely why Egypt remains so compelling. The answer is not one secret. It is a long tradition of practical intelligence refined across generations. The Nile is the foundation of that tradition. Without the river, Egypt's stone world would look very different. The Nile is road, calendar, food source, boundary, and machine. Its annual flood shapes agricultural life, but it also opens possibilities for transport. Stone quarried far from a building site can be brought to the river, loaded onto barges, carried through the valley, and delivered near construction zones by canals, harbours, or prepared causeways. This does not make the work easy. A block of granite from Aswan or fine limestone from Tura still has to be cut, dragged, loaded, balanced, unloaded, and moved over land again. But the river allows Egyptian builders to connect distant geological worlds. A monument near Memphis or Giza can contain stone from quarries far upstream, as though the whole valley has been gathered into one royal project. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom show this system at enormous scale. The Great Pyramid at Giza is built mostly from local limestone, quarried near the plateau, while finer casing stones likely came from Tura across the Nile. Granite used in internal chambers came from Aswan, far to the south. The practical logic is clear. Use abundant local stone for the immense bulk. Use finer stone where appearance, durability, or symbolic value demands it. Use hard granite where structural or ritual importance justifies the labour. This is not random monumentality. It is material planning. The builders understand that not every block needs to travel the same distance or receive the same finish. Egyptian greatness lies partly in knowing where effort matters most. The question of how pyramid blocks were raised has attracted endless debate, and it deserves caution. Ramps almost certainly played a role, but what kind of ramps, where, and at what stages remains debated. Straight ramps, zigzag ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps, combinations of ramps, levering, and stage platforms have all been proposed in different forms. Archaeological traces of ramps exist at some Egyptian sites. But the Great Pyramid itself does not preserve a complete ramp system that settles every argument. The evidence remains incomplete, partly because temporary construction features could be dismantled, eroded, buried, or reused. Still, the broad principle is not mysterious. To raise heavy blocks, builders need inclined surfaces, control, manpower, and organisation. The exact geometry is the unresolved part, not the human capability. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan brings the work down from the level of theory into the quarry dust. It lies partly freed from the bedrock, an enormous body of granite that would have been one of the largest obelisks ever attempted. The trench around it shows how workers pounded the stone with hard dolerite balls, slowly shaping the sides and separating the form from the surrounding rock. Then a crack appeared, or became impossible to ignore, and the project was abandoned. The obelisk remains where ambition met geology and lost. Its failure is one of the most important pieces of evidence in Egypt because it reveals method, scale, and risk in the same place. It also reminds us that Egyptian builders, for all their mastery, were not commanding stone with supernatural ease. They were negotiating with it, and sometimes stone refused. Obelisks add a different kind of difficulty because they are not merely heavy, they are long, slender, symbolic, and unforgiving. A building block can survive rough handling more easily than a monolith meant to stand as a single elegant shaft. An obelisk must be quarried without fatal cracks, transported without breaking, and raised without losing control. Ancient Egyptian reliefs and later evidence show that large monuments could be moved by sledges and teams. While raising may have involved ramps, prepared pits, controlled lowering, ropes, and careful management of angle and weight. Scholars still debate the exact procedures for the largest examples, but the achievement is not beyond physics, it is beyond carelessness. Every stage demands precision because one failure can destroy years of work. The famous image from the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, showing a colossal statue pulled on a sledge, offers one of the clearest windows into Egyptian transport. A large team pulls ropes attached to the sledge, while a figure pours liquid before it. For a long time, this detail was interpreted in various ways, but experimental work and physical reasoning suggest that moistening sand can reduce friction under suitable conditions. This does not mean every Egyptian stone slid easily across wet sand. Nor does it explain all transport. It shows something more valuable. Egyptian workers understood surface conditions. They knew that the ground could be prepared, improved, and made to cooperate. Their technology included observation of friction long before anyone expressed it in modern scientific language. Worker organisation is another area where older myths have weakened. The great Egyptian monuments were not simply thrown together by anonymous masses under a whip. As once imagined in popular culture, evidence from worker settlements near Giza shows organised labour communities with food supply, administration, medical care of some kind, and rotating crews. This does not mean the work was gentle or free in the modern sense. Ancient labour systems could involve obligation, hierarchy, taxation, and harsh conditions, but the people who built these monuments were skilled, fed, housed, organised, and embedded in the state's economy. The pyramids are not evidence of chaos, they They are evidence of bureaucracy made visible in stone. There is a dry understatement in realizing that one of Egypt's greatest engineering tools was paperwork. Rations, crews, deliveries, quarry output, boat movements, and temple estates all belong to the machinery of construction. A rope is useless if no one provides replacement fibre. A sledge cannot move if workers are not supplied. A quarry cannot function if food does not arrive. A building site fails if stone arrives in the wrong order. The ancient Egyptian state turns agriculture into labour, labour into stone movement, and stone movement into royal eternity. The system is human and administrative as much as mechanical. Egypt also shows how easily a monument can become a screen for later imagination, because the pyramids are so old, so large, and so visually perfect from a distance. Unsupported theories have gathered around them for centuries. Lost technologies, hidden energies, vanished masters, and extraterrestrial builders appear in modern speculation, but they are not needed to explain the evidence. Worse, they often distract from the real achievement. The true wonder is that a Bronze Age society, using the Nile, quarries, sledges, ramps, ropes, copper tools, stone pounders, skilled crews, and state organisation, could build on a scale that still dominates the horizon after more than 4,000 years. That is not a lesser story. It is the greater one. At the same time, Egypt should not be flattened into certainty. The exact ramp configurations for the largest pyramids remain debated. The full logistics of the heaviest granite elements are still reconstructed from partial evidence. The raising of the greatest obelisks is understood in principle more than in every practical detail. Some quarry routes and harbour arrangements are still being studied. The evidence remains incomplete, and responsible history leaves room for that incompleteness. But uncertainty is not emptiness. It is a landscape with many visible tracks, even if some disappear under sand. The Egyptian builders moved impossible stones by making a whole civilization participate. Quarries provided the bodies of monuments. The Nile provided movement. Farms provided food. Officials provided schedules. Craftsmen provided tools. Workers provided muscle and skill. Priests and kings provided meaning. Desert cliffs, river floodplains, and royal cemeteries became parts of one enormous system. In Egypt, stone does not move because one genius discovers a secret. It moves because a society learns to align geography, belief, administration, and labour until the desert itself seems to obey. And when the work is done, the process disappears behind form. The pyramid becomes a mountain of intention. The obelisk becomes a frozen sunbeam. The statue becomes a royal body that does not age. The temple wall becomes memory cut into relief. Egypt's stones still feel impossible because they succeed at their purpose. They outlast the workers, the rulers, the language of daily life, the wooden tools, the ropes, the ramps, the camps, and the hands that smoothed them. What remains is the illusion of effortless permanence. Beneath that illusion lies the real Egyptian miracle, not magic, but disciplined human effort organised so completely that it could make stone look eternal. Far to the northwest of Egypt's river world, in the damp winds of Atlantic Europe, another kind of stone ambition takes shape. It does not rise from the command of pharaohs, nor from states with scribes, tax records, and armies of administrators. It appears among farming communities whose houses are often modest, whose settlements can be difficult to trace, and whose monuments sometimes outlive nearly everything else they made. Across Britain, Ireland, Brittany, Iberia, and other regions touched by the Atlantic world, great stones stand in circles, rows, tombs, chambers, alignments, and lonely uprights against the weather. They are older than many empires. They belong to a time before written history in these landscapes, when memory is stored not on tablets or papyrus, but in earthworks, bones, pottery, paths, and stone. This makes the megaliths of Atlantic Europe especially unsettling. In Egypt, even when details are debated, the broad world of kingship and state labour helps explain the scale. At Stonehenge, Karnak, Newgrange, Avori, and countless smaller sites, the builders leave no written explanation. There is no surviving voice saying why a stone was chosen, why a circle mattered, why a tomb faced a certain direction, or why one community carried heavy stones farther than convenience required. Scholars still debate many of these meanings, and the evidence remains incomplete. Yet the stones themselves show that these were not simple or isolated acts. They required planning, repeated gatherings, shared labour, technical skill, and belief strong enough to bind scattered people into monument building long before cities dominated the region. The word megalith means great stone, but that plain definition hides a wide variety of structures. Some are standing stones set upright alone or in groups, some form circles or avenues, some are arranged in long alignments, like the vast rows near Karnak in Brittany, where thousands of stones stretch across the landscape in patterns that still resist any single explanation. Some are passage tombs, where stones form chambers buried beneath mounds, creating enclosed spaces for the dead, ritual. Or ancestral presence. Others are dolmens, table-like structures made from upright supports and a capstone. They do not all belong to one culture, one century, or one purpose. The Atlantic megalithic world is not a single project. It is a long, shifting tradition of communities using stone to shape memory, territory, death, season, and sky. Stonehenge is the most famous, partly because it is visually dramatic and partly because it refuses to become simple. Its great sarsen stones came from relatively nearby sources on the Marlborough Downs, still requiring difficult movement across the landscape, Its smaller bluestones came from Wales, from the Preseli region, more than 100 miles away by any practical route. How exactly they reached Salisbury Plain remains debated. Some researchers emphasise human transport over land and water. Others have explored the possibility that glacial movement may have carried some stones closer, though this remains disputed in the specific case of Stonehenge. What is clear is that the bluestones were not casually selected, their source mattered, and the effort to bring them into the monument suggests a connection between distant landscapes and ritual identity that is still not fully understood. The stones of Stonehenge also remind us that megalithic building could unfold over long periods. The monument did not appear all at once in the form tourists see today. Its history includes earlier earthworks, pits, timber or stone arrangements, cremation burials, later rearrangements, and changing patterns of use. This long development matters because it breaks the illusion of a single event. Stonehenge is not one construction moment. It is a place repeatedly reimagined. Generations return to it, alter it, add to it, and inherit decisions made by people already dead. The monument becomes cumulative, and its final form hides the many earlier landscapes beneath it. Moving the stones of Atlantic Europe required tools that seemed simple, but could be highly effective. Wooden sledges, ropes of plant fibre or hide, prepared tracks, rollers in some conditions, levers, earthen ramps, and careful shaping of sockets were likely part of the technical world. Experimental archaeology has shown that groups of people can move large stones with modest equipment when the route is prepared and the task is organised. These experiments do not prove the exact method used at every site, but they make one point difficult to ignore. The movement of megaliths does not require supernatural power. It requires enough people, enough patience, the right surfaces, and the ability to coordinate effort. Raising a stone upright is a different challenge from moving it horizontally. A standing stone must be guided into a prepared pit or socket, often with one end lowered first while the other is pulled or levered upward. The pit may be shaped so that the stone tips into position, and packing stones can be wedged around the base to stabilise it. Earth ramps or timber supports may help control the lift. The danger is obvious. A stone partly raised is unstable if it swings, slips, or falls. It can kill workers and destroy the effort already invested. What survives in the record rarely preserves the accidents, but the geometry of stone holes and packing arrangements shows that prehistoric builders understood stability through practice. They did not simply stand stones up and hope. Passage tombs reveal another form of megalithic intelligence. At Newgrange in Ireland, the mound and stone passage are arranged so that sunlight enters the chamber around the winter solstice sunrise. The effect is brief and delicate, especially compared with the mass of the mound itself. This does not mean every megalithic monument is an astronomical instrument, and careless claims about ancient observatories can go too far, but some alignments are too careful to dismiss. What survives suggests that certain communities were deeply attentive to the horizon, seasonal light, and the relationship between death, darkness, and renewal. Stone here is not merely heavy, it is placed to catch time. The builders of these monuments are often described as prehistoric farmers, but that phrase can make them sound simpler than they were. Farming in Neolithic Europe is not a quiet background activity. It transforms landscapes, diets, settlement patterns, social relations, and ideas of land ownership or ancestral claim. Forests are cleared, fields are made, animals are herded, communities become tied to particular places in new ways. Megaliths may emerge from this changing world as anchors of belonging. A tomb filled with selected bones may say that the dead remain present in the land. A stone alignment may mark a gathering place where scattered groups meet. A circle may create a shared centre in a world of dispersed farms. No single explanation fully accounts for all sites, but the connection between monuments, land, ancestry, and social gathering is hard to ignore. One lesser-known detail is that many megalithic monuments were not always as bare as they appear today. Stones may have been set within earthworks, timber structures, mounds, banks, ditches, or ceremonial routes that have since eroded or been ploughed away. Some stones may have been decorated, painted, or associated with offerings now lost. The modern visitor often sees a skeleton of the original place. The surrounding flesh of earth, wood, colour, sound, and movement has vanished. This makes the surviving stones seem isolated and mysterious, but in their own time they may have belonged to much richer ritual landscapes. Karnak in Brittany gives a sense of scale without needing a state like Egypt. Thousands of stones stand in long rows, their exact purpose still debated. They may have marked ceremonial avenues, ancestral landscapes, territorial expressions, cosmological patterns, or social gathering places. The alignments are too large to be reduced to a single household or small casual act. They imply sustained tradition and repeated participation. Yet they do not require a centralised empire. This is one of the most important lessons of Atlantic megaliths. Monumental construction can arise from community structures that are powerful without being royal. People do not need a pharaoh to move stone, they need shared meaning. That shared meaning may have been reinforced through feasting. At some monumental landscapes, evidence suggests large gatherings where people and animals came together, perhaps seasonally. Feasts are not decorative additions to ancient construction, they are engines of cooperation. Food, drink, ritual, labour, and social bonds can merge. A community that gathers to haul a stone may also gather to bury the dead, settle alliances, exchange goods, arrange marriages, renew obligations, or remember ancestors. The stone is the visible result, but the gathering itself may be just as important. The monument builds society while society builds the monument. Because there is no writing, certainty is limited, the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate whether specific sites were primarily funerary, ceremonial, astronomical, territorial, political, or some combination of these. Modern categories may not fit ancient thought neatly. A place of burial could also be a place of gathering. A sky alignment could also serve ancestral ritual. A stone from a distant source could be both geologically distinctive and socially meaningful. The mystery deepens when we stop demanding that each monument have only one purpose. The megaliths of Atlantic Europe show that impossible stones are not always about kings. They can belong to communities whose power is spread across kinship, ritual, memory, and seasonal cooperation. Their builders may never have imagined empire, but they understood permanence. They knew that a stone raised upright could change a horizon. They knew that a chamber of slabs beneath a mound could hold the dead in a form the living could revisit. They knew that bringing stone from far away could bind distant places into one sacred geography. They worked without written records that survive, and because of that, their silence is almost as heavy as the stones themselves. What remains today is weathered, incomplete, and still commanding. The Atlantic wind moves through gaps where timber once stood. Grass covers ditches that once defined sacred ground. Burial chambers sit in darkness until a narrow light enters at the appointed time. Standing stones lean slightly under the pressure of centuries, yet still mark human decisions made before history in these lands learned to write. The ancient builders here did not leave pyramids, but they left something equally difficult in another way, a map of belief made from stones too heavy for casual memory. Raised by people whose world is gone, but whose horizons still carry their intent. On remote islands and mountain-fringed seas, the movement of impossible stones becomes stranger because the world around the builders is smaller. A river valley can gather resources from hundreds of miles. An empire can command quarries, forests, boats, and labour across provinces. But an island narrows the stage. It limits timber, food, land, fresh water, and the number of people who can be spared for heavy work. It makes every decision more visible. When a community surrounded by ocean chooses to carve and move giant stone figures, build monumental platforms, or raise heavy blocks on ridges above the sea, the act feels especially intense. The stone does not merely say that people had power, it says they were willing to spend precious energy in a world where waste could become dangerous. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, stands at the centre of this kind of mystery. It is one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth, a volcanic triangle in the southeastern Pacific, far from continental sources of timber, metal, and large animals. Yet its people carved hundreds of moai, the famous stone figures with long faces, heavy brows, and solemn expressions. Many were cut from volcanic tuff at the quarry of Ranararaku, where unfinished statues still remain on the slopes like a frozen crowd waiting to depart. Some stand completed on ceremonial platforms called ahu. Others lie fallen along ancient routes, abandoned between quarry and destination. Their presence gives the island a haunting quality, because the process is visible and interrupted at once. The statues are both monument and evidence. The Rapa Nui moai were not all the same size, but many were enormous. Some weighed many tons. A few were far larger than most statues ever moved successfully. The largest unfinished moai at Ranararaku would have been extraordinarily heavy, likely beyond what was practical to transport with the methods used for others. Its existence shows ambition pressing against limits. It also shows that the quarry was not simply a place where finished statues emerged fully controlled. It was a field of experiments, failures, and changing choices. The evidence remains incomplete, but the unfinished figures help reveal how the islanders carved bodies from the volcanic slope, leaving them attached until enough form had been shaped to separate them. How the moai were moved has been debated for generations. Older explanations often imagined them dragged lying down on wooden sledges or rollers, which raised questions about the island's timber supply and environmental history. More recent experiments and interpretations suggest that some statues may have been moved upright, walked by teams using ropes to rock and pivot them forward. This idea is partly supported by the shape of transport moai, which may have been designed with a forward lean and base features that helped movement. Experimental teams have shown that replicas can be moved in this way with coordinated rope work. Scholars still debate details, and it is unlikely that one method explains every statue in every period. But the walking hypothesis has changed the conversation. It transforms the moai from inert cargo into carefully balanced bodies meant to travel. The idea that statues walked also resonates with island traditions, though those traditions must be handled carefully. Oral histories recorded long after the main period of statue construction describe moai moving by mana, a sacred force or authority often translated too simply as supernatural power. This does not mean the statues literally moved by magic in a modern sense. It may preserve a memory that the statues were seen as animate, empowered, or ritually alive. If a statue was moved upright, swaying forward under human control, the site could easily become part of a tradition that says the figures walked. Here again, practical method and belief are not enemies. The engineering could have served the sacred story. The moai were not placed randomly. Many stood on ahu platforms along the coast, often facing inland rather than out to sea. This detail surprises many people because the statues are often imagined as guardians watching the ocean. In many cases, They appear instead to face the living communities, embodying ancestors whose presence looked back toward their descendants. The platforms themselves were complex stone structures, sometimes containing burials and later modifications. The statue was only one part of a larger ceremonial landscape. To move a moai was not simply to transport art, it was to relocate ancestral force, social prestige, and community identity into a visible place. The island setting also exposes the relationship between monument building and environmental pressure. Rapa Nui was once more wooded than it is today, including palms that eventually disappeared. The causes of deforestation remain debated, involving human use, rats that affected palm regeneration, fire, climate variation, and other ecological pressures. Older stories often turned Rapa Nui into a simple lesson of self-destruction, claiming that reckless monument building consumed all the trees and collapsed the society. Current scholarship is more cautious. The evidence suggests environmental change was real, but the old collapse narrative is too neat. European contact later brought disease, violence, slave raiding, and disruption that devastated the population. No single explanation fully accounts for the island's history. The stones remain inside a story of resilience as much as warning. Other islands around the world show different forms of stone ambition. In the Mediterranean, prehistoric Malta holds massive temple complexes built from limestone blocks, some weighing many tons. These temples, older than the pyramids of Egypt, were created by communities with no metal tools in the early phases and no vast state apparatus. Their builders used local stone, but local does not mean easy. Quarrying, shaping, hauling, and setting heavy limestone blocks still required organised labour and careful planning. The temples include curved walls, carved decoration, paved areas, and monumental entrances that suggest complex ritual life. Scholars still debate the exact beliefs behind them, but their scale shows that island societies could concentrate effort into architecture of astonishing permanence. On Sardinia, the later Nuragic civilization built thousands of stone towers called nuraghi, using large blocks stacked into powerful tapering structures. These are not the same kind of single stone transport problem as an obelisk or moai, but they belong to the wider story of societies turning heavy stone into identity, defence, ritual, and authority. In the Balearic Islands, the Taliotic culture created distinctive megalithic monuments, including taulas on Menorca, where upright stones and capstones form T-shaped structures whose purpose remains debated. In each case, islands produce monuments that are deeply local, shaped by available stone, limited land, social competition, and ritual imagination. The surprising thing is that isolation does not necessarily make societies small in ambition. It can make monuments more important. On an island, land is bounded by the horizon, ancestry, territory, and community identity may be felt with particular intensity because there is nowhere endlessly outward to expand. Stone can become a way of fixing memory in a fragile world. It can mark lineage, rank, sacred place, or the connection between the living and the dead. It can turn a volcanic slope, a coastal platform, or a limestone temple into the centre of a universe surrounded by water. Transport on islands also forces builders to become experts in local terrain. On Rapa Nui, statue roads are part of the evidence. Fallen moai along these routes show where movement failed or stopped. Their distribution suggests pathways from quarry to platforms, and their positions help researchers reconstruct possible transport methods. The road itself becomes a kind of archaeological text. In Malta, local limestone could be quarried near building sites, reducing distance but not labour. In other island settings, cliffs, shorelines, slopes, and limited timber shaped what could be attempted. The method belongs to the island's body. There is a tendency to imagine ancient islanders as trapped by isolation, but ocean peoples often lived in worlds connected by navigation, memory, and exchange. Polynesian voyagers crossed immense distances by reading stars, winds, swells, birds, and currents. Mediterranean islanders traded, borrowed, adapted, and competed across sea routes. The sea can isolate, but it can also connect. This matters because stone monuments on islands may not be signs of lonely societies cut off from all knowledge. They may be local expressions of wider traditions, reshaped by island conditions. The evidence varies from place to place, and caution is necessary, but isolation should not be confused with ignorance. What islands reveal most clearly is the cost of monument building. Every worker carving a statue is not farming, fishing, repairing a house, or tending animals at that moment. Every rope, timber, tool, and meal used in transport has to come from somewhere. On a large continent, such costs can be spread across broader systems. On a small island, they are closer to the surface. This does not mean monument building was irrational. It means the reasons had to be strong. Ancestors, gods, chiefs. Social rivalry, ritual obligation, and shared identity may all have made the effort meaningful enough to bear. The giant statues and island stones are not evidence of lost machines. They are evidence of societies that understood balance in more than one sense. They balanced stone bodies with ropes and human rhythm. They balanced labour against food supply. They balanced memory against ecological limits. They balanced the desire for permanence against the vulnerability of island life. Some projects succeeded. Some failed and remain unfinished in the quarry. Some monuments were later toppled, reused, or reinterpreted as social worlds changed. The stones outlasted the systems that made them. On Rapa Nui, the silent faces still stand or lie under the Pacific sky. Their backs often turned to the waves, their eyes once perhaps filled with coral and red scoria, their meanings altered by time but not erased. In Malta, temple stones weather in the salt air, older than many famous civilizations that came after them. Across islands and sea roads, ancient builders proved that limited worlds could produce immense monuments. The ocean did not make their ambition smaller. It made every stone heavier with consequence. In the Andes, stone does not merely have to move across distance, it has to climb, descend, turn, and survive mountains. The builders who shaped the great walls, terraces, temples, roads, and sacred places of this region work in a landscape where gravity feels almost personal. Valleys drop sharply, slopes fold into one another, rivers cut deep channels through the earth, earthquakes trouble the ground, thin air changes the body's endurance, rain and frost test every joint. In such a world, moving heavy stones is not only an engineering problem, it is a negotiation with height, weather, and instability. The achievement of Andean stonework is not that it imitates the flatland monuments of other civilizations. It answers a different world entirely. The most famous examples belong to the Inca, whose empire spreads across West and South America in the 15th and early 16th centuries. But the story begins earlier. The Andes already hold long traditions of monumental building before the Inca rise to power. Earlier cultures shape ceremonial centers, carve stone, build platforms, raise walls, and organize labor across difficult terrain. The Inca inherit, absorb, and transform older knowledge. This matters because the astonishing stonework at places such as Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Machu Picchu does not appear from nowhere. It grows from a deep Andean habit of making order in steep landscapes. What survives in the record suggests continuity, adaptation, and imperial intensification rather than a single sudden invention. The Inca world lacks some technologies that many modern observers expect to find behind a large construction. It does not use the wheel for heavy transport in the practical sense, partly because the terrain and absence of suitable draft animals make wheeled hauling far less useful. It has no iron tools and no oxen or horses before Europeans arrive. Llamas are valuable pack animals, but they cannot pull enormous stone blocks the way oxen might in other parts of the world. This absence has often fed claims that the stones must have required some lost or mysterious method. Yet the evidence points instead to labour organisation. Ropes, ramps, sledges or dragging methods in some contexts, levering, careful route preparation, and extraordinary patience in shaping and fitting. The missing wheel is not proof of impossibility. It is proof that the builders solved the problem differently. At Sacsayhuaman, above Cusco, massive stones fit into walls with a precision that has become legendary. Some blocks are many tons in weight, and a few are far larger. Their shapes are irregular, not simple rectangles, with polygonal edges that interlock in complex patterns. This style does more than impress the eye. It can help resist earthquake movement, because the joints do not form long straight lines of weakness. The walls seem to ripple with stored intelligence. A stone's face may have 12 angles or more, each one meeting another stone with careful adjustment. No mortar fills the gaps. The stones meet directly, and their weight, shape, and fit hold them together. The fitting of such stones is often more mysterious than their transport. Moving a large block is difficult, but making it meet its neighbours so closely requires repeated testing and correction. Builders likely rough-shaped blocks at the quarry, transported them, then adjusted them at the site through pounding, abrasion, and patient trial fitting. Some surfaces show evidence consistent with stone hammering rather than smooth cutting by advanced tools. The process may have involved placing stones, marking high points, removing them or shifting them, dressing the surface, and trying again. This is slow work. It demands not only strength, but memory of shape. The stone must be imagined in relation to other stones. Each block becomes part of a puzzle whose final form is structural, visual, and perhaps symbolic. Ollantaytambo reveals another layer of the problem. There, large stones used in ceremonial architecture came from quarries across the valley, on the opposite mountainside. The route from quarry to building site was not a gentle road. Stones had to be brought down from the quarry area, across the valley floor or river zone, and up toward the construction terraces. Some unfinished or abandoned blocks, often called tired stones, still lie along the route. Their presence is invaluable because they show the journey was real, difficult, and sometimes interrupted. A finished wall can make success look inevitable. A tired stone left behind reminds us that weight had its own vote. The phrase tired stone is poetic, but it captures something important. A stone abandoned on a slope or along a route is not necessarily evidence of failure in a foolish project. It may show a change in plan, a fracture, a political interruption, a logistical problem, or simply a pause that became permanent after conquest or upheaval. Scholars still debate the exact circumstances of many abandoned stones, but they reveal that Andean builders, like Egyptian quarry workers and Rapa Nui sculptors, were not effortless masters of matter. They were experts working against limits. Their expertise is visible precisely because the limits remain visible. The Inca state is one of the greatest labour organising systems in the ancient Americas. It operates through obligations often described under the broad term mita, a form of labour service owed by communities to the state. People contribute work for roads, terraces, storehouses, military needs, farming and construction. In return, the state redistributes goods, manages storage, sponsors rituals, and asserts authority through a network of officials and local leaders. This does not mean labour was equal, gentle, or freely chosen in a modern sense. It was embedded in hierarchy and obligation, but it also means the movement of giant stones was supported by a social system capable of mobilizing people, food, tools, and planning across a rugged empire. Food storage is crucial in the Andes. Storehouses placed across the landscape hold maize, potatoes, dried meat, textiles, and other supplies. Roads and relay systems connect regions. Terraces expand farming into steep zones. This infrastructure makes monumental labour possible. A construction project at high elevation is not just a team of stone movers. It is a web of farmers, herders, cooks, rope makers, quarry workers, supervisors, ritual specialists, and messengers. The state can gather labour because it can also gather and distribute resources. As in Egypt, the stone moves because a whole system moves around it. The Andean environment makes stone architecture especially meaningful. Earthquakes are part of life along the western edge of South America. Walls that survive must respond to shaking, drainage, slope pressure, and seasonal weather. Inca masonry is not uniform everywhere. Some buildings use finely cut ashlar blocks, others use more practical fieldstone and mortar. Terraces and retaining walls vary according to function and status. The finest stonework appears in places of political and sacred importance, especially around Cusco and elite sites. This selective precision shows planning. Builders know when extreme effort is worth the cost. The most refined stones are not simply construction material, they are statements of imperial order. Andean stone also carries sacred geography. Mountains are not background scenery. Many Andean peoples understand powerful mountains, often called apus in later Quechua tradition, as living presences or sacred beings. Springs, caves, rocks, peaks, and unusual formations can hold religious significance. The Inca do not impose architecture on a dead landscape. They work within a world where stone and mountain may already be alive with meaning, at places like Machu Picchu. Architecture appears to respond to ridges, outcrops, sightlines, and sacred peaks. Some stones are carved in place rather than fully removed, blurring the line between natural formation and human monument. The evidence remains incomplete, especially because much Inca religious knowledge was disrupted by Spanish conquest. But it is clear that stone was more than a building resource. One of the lesser-known wonders of Andean construction is drainage. Modern attention often goes to tight stone joints and massive blocks, but many sites survive because builders understood water. At Machu Picchu, terraces, retaining walls, channels, and foundations manage rainfall in a steep mountain environment. Without drainage, beauty would fail, water would loosen soil, push walls outward, and destroy platforms from within. The hidden engineering under the visible stone may be less famous, but it is equally vital. Ancient builders who ignore water leave ruins quickly. Those who respect it can make architecture endure through centuries of rain. There are popular claims that Inca stones were melted, softened, levitated, or cut by unknown technologies. These claims are unsupported and unnecessary. The surfaces and archaeological context point toward human methods: quarrying, pounding, abrasion, levering, hauling, and fitting by skilled workers. Yet dismissing fringe ideas should not make the achievement feel smaller. On the contrary, the ordinary explanation is more impressive because it requires no shortcut. It asks us to imagine teams moving heavy stones through mountain landscapes, shaping them by repeated labour, fitting them without mortar, and placing them in walls that resist earthquakes better than many later constructions. The Andean builders prove that impossible stones are not always about height alone, or weight alone, or precision alone. They're about the combination. A massive block in a flat quarry is one kind of challenge. A massive block brought across a valley and fitted into a seismic mountain wall is another. The stones of the Andes carry the logic of their landscape in their joints, their irregular shapes, tight fits, terraces, foundations, and alignments all belong to a world where the earth is powerful, sacred, and never entirely still. When the Inca Empire falls to Spanish invasion, civil conflict, disease, and political disruption, much of the living system behind this stonework breaks. Roads remain, walls remain, terraces remain. But the institutions that organise labour on such a scale are transformed or destroyed. Later observers stand before the stones and see mystery, sometimes forgetting the empire of hands, fields, ropes, roads, storehouses, and mountain beliefs that made them possible. The stones seem impossible because the society that moved them is gone, but in their silence, they still speak with a particular Andean grammar weight controlled by rhythm, precision born from patience, and architecture shaped as though mountains themselves had agreed to be rearranged. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, beneath the ruins of Roman temples and later histories layered thick with conquest, worship, and rebuilding, some of the largest building stones ever used by human beings still sit in place. Baalbek does not announce its greatest mystery at first glance. The eye rises toward columns, carved capitals, stairways, walls, and the monumental remains of a sacred complex that later ages knew under Roman names. But below and around that visible grandeur lies an older and heavier problem: colossal limestone blocks. Some set into the podium of the temple complex, others abandoned in nearby quarries, so large that even in a world familiar with cranes and machines they still feel excessive. They are not merely big stones. They are stones that seem to challenge the very idea of practical construction. The most famous stones in the podium are often called the trilithon, 3 enormous limestone blocks set side by side in the western retaining wall of the temple platform. Each is estimated to weigh hundreds of tons. Their exact weights vary by calculation because ancient stones do not come with labels and density estimates can differ, but the scale is beyond dispute. Nearby quarries contain even larger blocks that were cut but never fully transported or installed. One of them, long known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, lies partly exposed, a giant rectangular mass still attached to the quarry landscape. Other colossal blocks discovered or studied nearby are even heavier. They show that the builders at Baalbek were not merely capable of handling great weight. They were thinking in a category of stone almost without parallel. This is why Baalbek has attracted so many legends. Later stories linked its stones to giants, to ancient heroes, to lost peoples, to beings with strength beyond ordinary humanity. Modern fringe theories have added other unsupported claims, imagining vanished technologies or impossible machines. The temptation is understandable. A stone weighing hundreds of tons does not fit easily into the casual imagination, but the evidence points toward human quarrying and construction. Most likely within the broad context of the Roman or Hellenistic Roman monumental building tradition at the site, even if some details remain debated. Baalbek does not require a non-human explanation. It requires a serious appreciation for what ancient imperial engineering could attempt when wealth, labour, terrain, and ambition aligned. The first important detail is that the quarry is close. Unlike stones carried across entire countries, the largest Baalbek blocks did not need to travel hundreds of miles. The quarry lies near the temple complex. This does not make the task easy, but it changes the problem. The builders were not solving long-distance transport. They were solving extraction, short-distance hauling, elevation control, and placement of immense blocks. A short journey for a very heavy object can still be more difficult than a long journey for a smaller one. The proximity of the quarry may be one reason such huge stones were even considered. If the right limestone lay nearby, builders could imagine using blocks too massive to be practical in a project requiring distant transport. The quarry blocks themselves are among the best witnesses. They show that ancient workers cut trenches around enormous rectangular masses, separating them from surrounding bedrock in stages. Tool marks and quarry faces reveal a process of planned extraction rather than accidental natural formation. The unfinished blocks also show that not every colossal ambition was completed. Some stones may have been abandoned because of flaws, changing plans, logistical difficulty, or because the need for them vanished as construction phases changed. Scholars still debate exactly why the largest quarry stones remained where they were, but their presence is crucial. They prove that the builders were capable of preparing stones at a scale even larger than those installed, while also showing that size could defeat usefulness. The platform at Baalbek belongs to a world of monumental sanctuaries. The Roman temple complex, especially the Temple of Jupiter, was designed to overwhelm. Huge podiums and terraces raised sacred architecture above the surrounding ground. Columns reached extraordinary heights. Courtyards and stairways structured movement, ceremony, and imperial display. In such a setting, large stones were not only structural, they were ideological. A massive platform makes the temple feel less built than founded into the earth. It elevates ritual, magnifies power, and makes human bodies feel small as they approach the sacred centre. The builders were not simply asking what stone is needed, they were asking in effect how weight could become authority. The trilithon blocks sit in a retaining wall, and this matters. They are not balanced upright like obelisks or transported as delicate statues. They are horizontal blocks incorporated into a platform structure. That position may have made their use more feasible than raising similar stones vertically. A massive block dragged or slid into a wall course still presents immense difficulty, but it does not require the same kind of final upright lift as a standing monolith. Ancient builders may have moved such blocks on prepared tracks, rollers where suitable, sledges, capstans, winches, levers, earth ramps, or combinations of these methods. The exact system is not preserved in full, the evidence remains incomplete, but Roman engineers possessed a wide toolkit of lifting and hauling technologies, including cranes, pulleys, tread wheels for smaller but still significant loads, and large-scale earthworks, for the very largest blocks. The ground itself probably had to become part of the machinery. One possibility is that builders minimize lifting by quarrying blocks at a useful elevation and moving them along prepared routes toward the platform. If a stone can be kept near the level where it will be installed, the problem becomes horizontal movement and careful positioning rather than vertical hoisting. This principle appears in many ancient engineering contexts. It is easier to build earth up around a stone than to lift the stone high into empty air, ramps, embankments. And temporary fills can vanish after construction, leaving later observers staring at a block that seems to have appeared in the wall without the vanished landscape that made placement possible. Baalbek may have depended on this kind of temporary reshaping of ground, though the exact details remain debated. The scale of the stones also raises a practical question. Why use blocks so large when smaller blocks would be easier? There may not be one answer. Large blocks can help stabilize a retaining wall, reduce the number of joints, and create a powerful visual impression. They may also reflect local quarry conditions, where large masses of suitable limestone could be extracted. But beyond practicality lies prestige. Roman imperial architecture often uses scale to speak. Roads, aqueducts, amphitheatres, baths, bridges, and temples all display the capacity to command material and labour across distance. At Baalbek, colossal stones turn the foundation itself into a statement, even before a worshipper looks up at the columns. The platform says that this sacred place rests on strength beyond ordinary building. Yet Roman engineering should not be imagined as a magic solution. Even with advanced cranes and organised labour, the trilithon blocks are near the upper edge of what ancient builders are known to have handled. This is why they remain exceptional. The ancient Mediterranean world moved many large stones, raised monolithic columns, transported obelisks, and built huge walls. But Baalbek's largest blocks stand out even against that background. They are not routine Roman masonry made slightly larger. They represent a decision to push scale to an extreme. The fact that some even larger stones were abandoned nearby suggests that the builders themselves recognised limits. Ambition reached farther than construction finally required, or farther than was practical to complete. The human system behind Baalbek must have been immense. Quarry crews cut the blocks. Surveyors and planners judged dimensions, route and platform alignment. Labourers prepared roads or ramps. Carpenters built hauling equipment and supports. Rope makers or suppliers provided lines strong enough to distribute force. Supervisors coordinated teams. Animals may have assisted where useful, though for the greater stones, human-managed mechanical systems and prepared ground were likely critical. Food, water, housing, and payment or obligations sustained the workers. The finished stones hide this entire system behind their blank faces. A visitor sees limestone. The archaeologist has to imagine logistics. Baalbek also reminds us that ancient monuments often sit on older sacred landscapes. The site had significance before the great Roman complex reached its monumental form. Local religious traditions, Hellenistic influences, and Roman imperial power all contributed to its development. This layering complicates the question of who exactly first planned or began certain parts of the platform. Some debates remain over construction phases and earlier foundations. What survives in the record suggests a long history rather than a single clean moment. The stones belong to a place repeatedly claimed and transformed by different powers, each adding weight to an already significant landscape. The abandoned quarry stones have a special emotional force because they preserve ambition without completion. A block left in a quarry is like a sentence cut off before its final word. The builders invested enormous effort in defining its shape, cutting around it, and preparing it for possible movement. Then the work stopped. Perhaps the stone had a flaw, perhaps the building plan changed, perhaps the project was interrupted by politics, money, engineering difficulty, or altered priorities. The exact reason may never be known, but the abandoned giants show that ancient builders were not merely executing perfect plans. They were exploring the edge of feasibility. Sometimes they stepped back. This edge is where the real mystery of Baalbek lives. It is not a mystery of aliens or lost levitation. It is the mystery of human societies choosing to operate near the maximum of what their systems could bear. Why make the block so large? Why cut an even larger one? Why build a sacred platform at such a scale? The answers likely include engineering, local geology, religious grandeur, imperial competition, and the desire to make power feel geological. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional effect of the stones. They are practical objects, but they do not feel merely practical. They feel like architecture trying to become mountain. In that sense, Baalbek belongs beside Egypt, Stonehenge, Rapa Nui, and the Andes. Even though its historical world is different, it shows that the urge to move impossible stones did not end with prehistory or early kingdoms. Even highly organised classical civilizations, with developed tools and written traditions, still found meaning in weight itself. The largest blocks made a sanctuary seem older than its builders, stronger than its rulers, and more permanent than the ceremonies held above it. They turned construction into an act of domination over the earth, but also dependence on it, because every stone began as a gift of local geology. Today, the great blocks remain mostly silent under the sun, their surfaces worn by weather and centuries of interpretation. The temples above them have suffered damage, rebuilding, reverence, abandonment, and study. Empires that once claimed the site have disappeared, but the stones are still there, doing what colossal stones do best, resisting explanation just enough to keep attention fixed on them. They do not prove that ancient people had impossible powers. They prove something more sobering. With enough organisation, ambition, and willingness to spend human effort on a sacred idea, ancient builders could push ordinary methods to extraordinary extremes. At Baalbek, the impossible stone is not outside history. It is history made heavy. The deeper the story moves into stone, the clearer it becomes that weight alone explains very little. A block may weigh 10 tons, 50 tons, or several hundred tons, but the number by itself does not reveal why people gathered around it, fed workers for it, dragged it across land, raised it upright, polished its face, or placed it where generations would see it. The stones were technical problems, but they were never only technical problems. They belonged to worlds of authority, belief, fear, memory, competition, and hope. Ancient builders did not move impossible stones because they misunderstood difficulty. They moved them because difficulty was part of the message. A monument made from small materials can be beautiful, but a monument made from great stones makes a different claim. It says that many hands have acted together. It says that someone or something had the power to organise time. It says that ordinary daily life could be interrupted for a purpose larger than immediate survival. This is why stone is so often found at the centre of sacred and political landscapes. Its heaviness becomes social evidence. A single person cannot move it. A household cannot easily raise it. A scattered group cannot complete it without agreement or command. By the time a massive stone stands in place, it has already proven that a community, chiefdom, kingdom, empire, or ritual network can make people move as one body. In state societies, this proof often becomes political. Egyptian pyramids, Mesopotamian temples, Roman platforms, Andean walls, and other monumental projects show rulers turning labour into landscape. The king or emperor may not touch the stone, but the stone speaks in the voice of rule. It makes hierarchy visible. It transforms agricultural surplus into architecture. It shows that fields, storehouses, quarry crews, transport teams, specialists, and administrators can be gathered under one command. This is power made physical. The monument does not merely honour authority after the fact. It helps create authority by showing people what authority can do. Yet it would be too simple to imagine every stone as a tyrant's demand. Many monuments were built in societies where power may have been more dispersed, seasonal, negotiated, or ritualized. The megalithic circles and tombs of Atlantic Europe, for example, do not require kings in the Egyptian sense. They may reflect communities drawn together by ancestry, ceremony, feasting, territorial identity, or shared cosmology. In such places, stone still expresses power. But power may take the form of collective obligation rather than centralized command. A great stone can be raised because a ruler orders it, but it can also be raised because many families agree that the dead, the land, or the season demands it. Scholars still debate these social arrangements, especially where writing is absent, but the monuments make one thing clear: cooperation itself can be monumental. Belief gives labour endurance. Without belief, a stone is just an obstacle. With belief, it becomes an ancestor, a doorway, a foundation for a god, a sign of royal eternity, a marker of the sun's return, a mountain brought into human order, or a body through which memory remains present. This does not mean ancient workers were always enthusiastic or equal participants. Some may have been compelled. Some may have worked from duty, tax obligation, fear, pride, hunger, devotion, or the simple fact that their community expected it. Human motives are rarely pure, but belief can make suffering legible. It can turn exhaustion into service, danger into sacrifice, and construction into ritual. The movement of stone may itself have been ceremonial. A block dragged from quarry to monument is not only being transported, it is being transformed. At the quarry, it belongs to the earth. On the road, it becomes a public event. At the destination, it becomes architecture, ancestor, symbol, or sacred object. In some cultures, the journey may have mattered as much as the final placement. People may have watched it pass, touched it, sung around it, offered food, marked stages of travel, or remembered where it stalled and where it moved again. The evidence for these rituals is often indirect and incomplete, but the scale of transport makes pure practicality unlikely in many settings. A great stone crossing a landscape is too strange to remain ordinary. Feasting appears again and again in discussions of ancient monument building, because it solves more than one problem. It feeds workers, but it also creates obligation. A feast can reward labour, display generosity, settle tensions, reinforce leadership, and transform difficult work into a shared occasion. In societies without coin wages or written contracts, food and ceremony can become the currency of cooperation. Meat consumed near a monument, pottery broken after gatherings, hearths, temporary camps, and animal bones may all point toward episodes when building, ritual, and social bonding overlapped. What survives in the record suggests that people often built monuments not as silent labourers alone, but as participants in gatherings where work and meaning were inseparable. There is a surprising intimacy in this. The most colossal stones are often born from very human needs to remember the dead, to secure a lineage, to impress rivals, to gather scattered people, to make a ruler seem eternal, to ask the sky for order, to place the sacred in a form that cannot easily burn or rot. The scale may be enormous, but the anxieties are familiar. Human beings fear forgetting. They fear disorder. They fear that leaders will die, ancestors will fade, seasons will fail, and communities will fracture. Stone answers those fears by pretending that something can remain fixed. It does not truly defeat time, but it slows time enough to comfort the living. The labour behind such monuments also creates identity. A person who helps move a stone can say, in effect, that their body is part of the place. The work becomes hidden inside the monument's presence. Generations later, descendants may not know individual names, but the stone can still stand as proof that their people did something difficult together. This may be especially important in communities where memory is carried through oral tradition. The monument becomes a physical anchor for stories. It gives memory a location. It allows people to gather where effort once gathered. In empires, the same process can be more imposing. A conquered or obligated population may be drawn into labour that glorifies rulers far above them. The monument then becomes both a symbol of unity and a reminder of inequality. Workers may gain food, protection, prestige, or ritual participation, but they also surrender time and strength to a political order. The evidence remains incomplete for many projects, and modern categories like free labour, forced labour, and paid labour do not always fit ancient systems neatly. Still, it is important not to romanticise the stones. Monument building could inspire pride, but it could also exhaust bodies and concentrate power. The body is where social meaning becomes physical reality. A ruler can decree a monument, a priest can bless it, a planner can measure it, but bodies still pull the ropes. Bodies quarry, carry, lever, pack, polish, cook, haul water, twist fibres, cut timber, and clear roots. The grand idea depends on shoulders, hands, knees, backs, and feet. This is why the human cost can never be separated from the symbolic power. The more impressive the monument, the more invisible lives it contains. A stone wall may look clean and abstract, but its true foundation is labour. Ancient builders also understood spectacle. The sight of a stone being raised could create awe before the monument was even finished. A standing stone emerging from a pit, an obelisk lifted toward the sky, a statue arriving at its platform, a giant block sliding into a temple wall. These moments would have marked memory. They likely attracted crowds and reinforced the authority of those who organised them. The successful movement of a massive stone is a public demonstration that order can overcome resistance. It says that the community, the ruler, or the gods have prevailed over weight. But spectacle is fragile. If a stone breaks, slips, or refuses to move, the message changes. Failure could become embarrassing, dangerous, or ritually troubling. This may explain why some projects were carefully staged, why stones were rough-shaped with protective margins, why roots were prepared so thoroughly, and why abandoned blocks were sometimes left quietly behind. No single explanation fully accounts for unfinished stones. But their presence shows that monument building carried risk not only to bodies but to reputation. A failed stone could expose the limits of power. The greatest monuments therefore sit at the intersection of confidence and uncertainty. Their builders believe the task can be done, but they cannot remove all danger. They trust tools, labour, leadership, and ritual, but stone still has hidden cracks. Weather still changes. People still tire. The ground still shifts. This tension may be part of what gives ancient stone monuments their emotional force. They are not easy victories. They are wagers made against time and matter. When the stone finally stands, or fits, or rests in its wall, it begins a second life. The workers leave, the scaffolds come down, the ropes are stored or discarded, the ramps erode, the feast ends, the ruler dies, the ritual calendar changes. The original meaning may fade, but the stone remains available for new meanings. Later people may worship it, fear it, quarry it, build around it, name it after giants, turn it into a tourist site, or argue over its purpose. A monument built to secure memory can become mysterious precisely because it survives longer than memory does. This is the paradox at the heart of impossible stones. They were meant to make human intention permanent, yet their survival often outlasts the explanation of that intention. They preserve power, but not always the names of those who held it. They preserve belief, but not always the words of the prayers. They preserve labour, but not the workers' voices. They preserve a decision made with immense effort, while hiding the conversations, pressures, and emotions behind that decision. What remains is stone, and stone is both generous and silent. The ancient builders moved impossible stones because their societies needed visible permanence. Sometimes that need came from kings, sometimes from ancestors, sometimes from gods, rivalry, grief, pride, or the desire to gather people around a shared centre. The technical methods mattered, but they were only half the story. The other half was the human world that made the methods worth using. Without belief and social power, a stone stays in the quarry. With them, it crosses landscapes and becomes a monument, and after everything else disappears, that monument still stands, heavy with meanings that time has partly erased but never fully emptied. If there is a lost secret behind the movement of impossible stones, it is probably not a secret in the way modern imagination wants it to be. It is not likely to be one hidden device, one vanished formula, one forbidden machine, or one master technique that explains Egypt, Stonehenge, Rapa Nui, the Andes, Baalbek, and every other stone monument at once. The deeper pattern is more ordinary and more impressive. Ancient builders relied on combinations of ramps and sledges, levers and ropes. Prepared ground and patient timing, water transport and human rhythm, temporary structures and permanent belief. The stones moved because many small advantages were stacked together until resistance could be overcome. The most basic of these advantages is the ramp. A ramp does not look mysterious. It is an inclined surface. But in ancient construction, a ramp can become a major engineering work in its own right. To raise a heavy block, builders may not need to lift it straight upward. They can build earth, rubble, brick, timber, or stone into a slope and drag the object gradually higher. This trades height for distance. The load rises, but slowly. The problem is no longer simply lifting. It becomes building and maintaining the road into the sky. A ramp must be strong enough to bear weight, wide enough for workers and equipment, stable enough not to collapse, and arranged so that it does not block the rest of construction. This is why ramp debates can become so intense. At a small scale, the idea is simple. At pyramid scale, it becomes complicated. A straight ramp to the height of a large pyramid would require enormous material and space if kept at a gentle slope. A steeper ramp reduces material but makes hauling harder and more dangerous. A zigzag ramp saves some space but complicates turns. A spiral ramp may wrap around the structure but can interfere with measuring and finishing. An internal ramp is an elegant proposal for some pyramid construction, but evidence is difficult to confirm fully. Scholars still debate the exact arrangements at major sites because temporary ramps often disappear. The main idea is secure. The precise architecture of the temporary system remains uncertain. Levers offer another ancient advantage, A lever can lift or shift a stone by a small amount, especially when combined with blocking. Raise one edge, insert a wedge or stone packing, raise again, insert more support, and the impossible weight begins to climb by increments. This method is slow, but slowness is not failure. Levering can adjust stones with great precision, nudge blocks into alignment, or help raise uprights into prepared sockets. It can also work where large teams cannot easily pull. A lever does not abolish weight. It changes how weight is negotiated. It allows a few people to make a stone move a little, and a little is often enough when repeated hundreds of times. Wedges are equally humble and equally powerful. A dry wooden wedge driven into a crack and soaked with water can expand, helping split stone in some conditions. Stone or wooden wedges can hold lifted blocks in place while workers reset levers. Packing stones can stabilize a standing megalith at its base. Small pieces of material, carefully placed, can control a mass far larger than themselves. This is one of the quiet principles of ancient engineering. The small thing matters because it is placed at the right point. A wedge the size of a hand can help govern a stone the size of a room. Sledges solve the problem of direct contact between block and ground. A stone dragged without support may dig in, fracture, or become trapped by irregularities. A sledge spreads pressure and creates a replaceable surface beneath the load. If the path is wetted, smoothed, planked, or covered with clay, movement becomes easier. Famous Egyptian evidence for sledges does not mean all ancient builders used identical devices, but it shows the logic clearly. A sledge is a simple machine made from wood, but its effectiveness depends on details: the shape of runners, the strength of joints, the placement of the load, the pulling angle, and the condition of the track. Lubrication is another area where modest knowledge produces real results. Water on sand can reduce friction if the sand is too dry and loose, because the right amount of moisture helps grains bind and support movement. Too much water, however, can create mud or instability. Too little does little. Clay, oil, animal fat, or plant material may have been used in certain contexts, depending on availability, though direct evidence varies. The larger point is that ancient builders observed surfaces. They knew that a load behaves differently on dry sand, damp sand, packed earth, planks, gravel, and mud. They may not have described this with equations, but they worked with the physical reality every day. Counterweights and controlled descent may also have played roles in some settings. A heavy object can be guided by ropes over a slope, with teams restraining from behind or using weights to balance movement. In quarrying, lowering a block may be as important as raising one. In construction, earth embankments may allow a stone to slide or be hauled into position gradually. These methods leave little evidence because ropes decay, wooden frames vanish, and temporary fills are removed. What survives in the record often shows only the final stone, not the devices that made movement controllable. For smaller but still heavy stones, ancient cranes and lifting frames could matter. The Greeks and Romans developed sophisticated lifting technology using pulleys, winches, treadwheels, and cranes, especially for architectural blocks, columns, and public buildings. Lewis holes and other lifting devices show that stones could be prepared for mechanical handling, yet for the very largest blocks, such as those at Baalbek, ordinary crane lifting may not have been sufficient on its own. The heavier stones likely required methods that minimized vertical lifting, prepared routes, ramps, sliding, levering, and earthworks. Advanced mechanical knowledge and environmental manipulation work together. The existence of cranes does not remove the need for ground-based engineering. Experimental archaeology has been especially useful because it forces theories to meet the body. It is one thing to say that people could pull a stone with ropes. It is another to gather a team, attach lines, prepare a track, and discover where the load twists, where the rope bites, where the sledge digs, where rhythm fails, and where friction becomes manageable. Experiments have moved megalith-sized stones, raised uprights, tested Egyptian sand wetting, explored Rapa Nui statue walking, and examined how ancient tools shape rock. These experiments do not prove exact ancient methods and are supported by archaeological context, but they restore respect for practical possibility. They show that many impossible tasks become possible through controlled conditions, teamwork, and repetition. At the same time, experiments can be misleading if treated too broadly. A successful modern test with a replica does not automatically prove that ancient builders used the same method. Modern teams may use different ropes, safety equipment, assumptions, or landscapes. A method that works for one stone size may fail for another. A technique tested on level ground may not apply on a mountain slope. A replica made from one material may behave differently from the original stone. Responsible interpretation keeps the experiment in its place. It is evidence of feasibility, not always evidence of history. The evidence remains incomplete until tool marks, roads, quarries, unfinished stones, and cultural context are brought into the same picture. Lost methods may have existed, but they were probably lost crafts rather than lost miracles. A certain way of knotting ropes, a method of distributing pull teams, a local technique for building temporary tracks, a quarrying sequence known to specialists, a way of listening for cracks in stone, a traditional rhythm for raising an upright. These things can disappear without leaving clear artifacts. A society can lose a method when its workers die, when its institutions collapse, when forests are cut, when religion changes, when roads are abandoned, or when new materials make old knowledge unnecessary. The loss is real, but it does not require fantasy. Much of human skill has always lived in bodies and communities, not in books. This may be the most important corrective to the mystery. Ancient technology was often temporary by design. Ramps were meant to be dismantled. Sledges were meant to wear out. Ropes were meant to be replaced. Wooden frames were meant to be reused or left to decay. Work camps could vanish under soil. A construction road might be ploughed away 1,000 years later. The things that made the stone move were not meant to last as long as the stone itself. The result is an archaeological imbalance. The permanent object survives, while the temporary machinery disappears. Mystery grows from preservation as much as from ignorance. The practical explanations do not make the stones less impressive. They make them more human. A levitating stone would be a marvel for a moment, but a dragged, raised, fitted, and polished stone is a record of discipline. It carries the marks of planning, injury, skill, and persistence. Ramps, levers, sledges, and ropes may sound plain, but plain tools used at vast scale require extraordinary organisation. The wonder is not that ancient builders escaped physics. The wonder is that they understood enough of physics through experience to make it serve them. And so the search for lost methods should continue, but with patience. Each site asks its own question. What was the stone? Where was the quarry? What route was possible? What tools existed in that period? What labour system could support the work? What traces remain of roads, ramps, tool marks, camps, or unfinished blocks? What symbolic reason justified the effort when these questions are asked together? Impossible stones become less like riddles and more like biographies. Each one has a birth. A journey, a struggle, and a final role. The ancient builders did not leave all their answers behind. Some methods are still debated. Some routes remain uncertain. Some stones sit in place with no complete explanation for every stage of their movement. But the outline of human capability is clear. They used simple machines with complex intelligence. They turned ground into equipment. They turned groups into engines. They turned patience into force, and where the evidence falls silent. The stones themselves still preserve the central truth the impossible was often not a violation of nature, but a long negotiation with it. Where evidence ends, imagination begins to build. It happens almost automatically. A visitor stands before a stone block larger than a modern truck, or a circle of uprights older than written memory, or a wall so tightly fitted that a blade cannot easily enter the joints, and the mind looks for a shortcut. The ordinary world seems too small for the object in front of it. Hands seem too weak, ropes seem too fragile. Wooden sledges seem too plain. A ramp seems too simple to explain such grandeur. Into that feeling enters myth, ancient and modern alike, offering giants, gods, vanished civilizations, secret sciences, levitation, or visitors from the stars. These stories often say more about the people telling them than about the stones themselves. This does not mean myth is foolish. In older societies, myths about great stones could preserve awe, warning, ancestry, or local memory long after the original builders were gone. A medieval village near a prehistoric monument might no longer know who raised it or why. A later farming community might inherit a stone circle as a strange feature of the land, already ancient beyond ordinary understanding. In such places, stories of giants or spirits are not simply bad archaeology. They are attempts to make sense of inherited ruins. They keep the stones inside culture even when technical knowledge has disappeared. The evidence remains incomplete, but the persistence of legend shows that monuments continue to affect people long after their first meanings faded. Modern fringe theories are different because they often pretend to be explanations while ignoring the strongest evidence. They may claim that ancient stones were too large for human transport, even when unfinished quarries, ancient roads, tool marks, workers' settlements, experimental archaeology, and comparable techniques show that human methods are plausible. They may point to precision and assume advanced machines, while overlooking the slow power of abrasion, pounding, trial fitting, and skilled craft. They may argue that people without iron could not cut stone, while ignoring stone pounders, copper tools used with abrasives, and the many ways different materials respond to repeated labour. Such claims flourish, because they offer drama without patience. The most common error is to compare ancient achievements with modern convenience rather than ancient capability. A modern person sees a 100-ton stone and thinks of cranes, because cranes are the familiar solution. If no crane appears in the archaeological record, the task feels impossible, but ancient builders did not need to solve the problem in a modern way. They had time, labour systems, simple machines, prepared landscapes, and generations of practical knowledge. Their methods were slower, more exhausting, and more dependent on human coordination. But slower does not mean weaker. A thing can be difficult without being mysterious in the supernatural sense. Another error is the assumption that lost writing means lost intelligence. Many of the people who moved megaliths left no technical manuals because they lived in oral societies, or because their records were made on materials that did not survive, or because the knowledge belonged to craft traditions rather than formal texts. The absence of a written blueprint is not evidence of ignorance, it is evidence of preservation bias. A wooden model rots, a rope decays. A foreman's instruction disappears with his voice. A builder's trained eye leaves no inscription. What remains is the stone, and the stone can be mistaken for a miracle because the teaching system that made it possible has vanished. Fringe theories also tend to separate monuments from their human landscapes. They focus on the finished stone as an isolated object, detached from quarries, roads, settlement patterns, food production, social organisation, ritual practice, and environmental knowledge. But no ancient monument exists alone. The pyramids belong to the Nile, worker towns, quarry systems, and royal ideology. Stonehenge belongs to a changing ceremonial landscape of earthworks, burials, timber structures, and distant stone sources. Rapa Nui's Moai belong to quarries, statue roads, platforms, ancestor traditions, and island ecology. Inca walls belong to roads, labour obligation, sacred geography, terraces, and seismic mountains. When the wider landscape is restored, the stones become human again. There is also a quieter problem. Some unsupported theories diminish ancient people while pretending to honour them. By saying the builders could not have done the work, they remove skill from the very societies that left the evidence. They turn real quarry workers, rope makers, planners, cooks, haulers, carvers, and ritual specialists into background figures while giving credit to imaginary outsiders. This is especially troubling when applied unevenly to non-European or indigenous achievements. The claim may sound like admiration, but it often rests on disbelief that certain ancient peoples could possess engineering intelligence. The stronger and more respectful view is also the better supported one. These monuments were human achievements, created within specific cultures by people who understood their materials and landscapes deeply. Still, it is important not to respond to fringe claims by pretending every question is solved. That would be its own kind of distortion. Many details remain debated. The exact ramp systems for some pyramids are not fully known. The full transport route of Stonehenge's bluestones remains contested. The movement method for every Rapa Nui statue is not settled beyond all doubt. The detailed procedures for fitting the finest Andean masonry are reconstructed from evidence. Not preserved as complete instructions, the larger stones at Baalbek still raise questions about exact transport and placement. The evidence remains incomplete, and uncertainty is part of honest history. But uncertainty is not permission to invent anything. It is an invitation to investigate more carefully. A useful distinction separates mystery from impossibility. A mystery is a question not yet fully answered. Impossibility is a claim that something could not have happened by known means. Ancient stone monuments often contain mysteries, but far fewer impossibilities than popular culture suggests. A block may be extremely difficult to move, but not physically impossible. A wall may be astonishingly precise, but not beyond patient fitting. A distant quarry source may be surprising, but not evidence of magic. The word impossible should be used carefully because it can close the mind as easily as open it. The reason these theories endure is not only ignorance. They endure because the stones create a real emotional problem. Modern life is full of machines, but often disconnected from material effort. Many people have never quarried stone, twisted rope, built a ramp, dragged a heavy load, or watched a large team coordinate physical labour. Ancient construction therefore feels alien. The scale of effort is hard to inhabit imaginatively. A mythical explanation becomes easier than picturing weeks of hauling, years of preparation, hundreds of meals cooked, thousands of tool strikes, and repeated failures overcome by persistence. The supernatural shortcut is often less demanding than the human truth. There is another reason the monuments were designed to inspire awe. They are doing their job. A pyramid, an obelisk, a megalithic circle, a moai, a cyclopean wall, or a giant temple platform is meant to feel larger than daily life. The builders wanted later people to sense power, sacred presence, ancestral depth, or imperial permanence. When modern visitors feel overwhelmed, they are not misreading the monument. They are responding exactly as stone architecture often intends. The mistake comes when awe is treated as evidence against human construction. Awe is not proof of aliens, giants, or lost engines. It is proof that the monument still works. Responsible history can leave space for wonder without surrendering to fantasy. It can say that ancient builders moved stones by human means, and still admit that the full experience of those projects is difficult to reconstruct. It can explain ramps, levers, sledges, ropes, barges, quarries, and labour systems without flattening the emotional force of the sites. It can reject unsupported claims while recognising that myths themselves are part of the afterlife of monuments. The goal is not to drain mystery from the stones. The goal is to place the mystery where it belongs in human persistence, social organisation, technical memory, and the strange desire to make meaning heavy. The missing evidence will always leave shadows. Wood has vanished, ropes have vanished, songs have vanished, orders shouted across quarry floors have vanished, workers' names have vanished, ritual gestures performed before a stone moved have vanished. What remains can look too clean, too sudden, too silent. But that silence should not be filled carelessly. It should be listened to. The stones do not tell us everything. But they tell us enough to know that ancient people were neither helpless nor simple. They were capable of planning beyond one lifetime, coordinating bodies at vast scale, and turning ordinary tools into extraordinary outcomes. Myths are born from missing evidence, but they also grow from admiration. The task is to keep the admiration and remove the insult. The builders do not need to be rescued by fantasy. Their achievement is already immense. They took stone from mountains, islands, deserts, river valleys, and quarries. They dragged it, floated it, rocked it, levered it, raised it, fitted it, and gave it meaning. Later ages forgot the methods and invented giants. The stones themselves remember something better. They remember human beings working at the edge of what seemed possible and moving that edge by force of patience. Behind every impossible stone is a human body that does not survive in the monument. The stone remains visible, solid, and strangely calm, but the people who moved it are mostly gone without names. Their bones may rest elsewhere, if they survive at all. Their tools may be broken, reused, or lost. Their hands leave only indirect traces in marks on quarry walls, chips of stone, worn paths, campsites, food remains, and the final placement of the block. The monument turns labour into silence. It asks the viewer to admire scale, while hiding the ache of shoulders, the cracked skin, the hunger after a long day, the fear when a rope tightens, and the ordinary exhaustion of people whose work became another generation's mystery. To understand the human cost, it is necessary to begin before the stone moves. A construction project consumes a society long before the first hauling team gathers. Fields must produce enough surplus to feed workers who are not farming for themselves that day. Herds, fisheries, granaries, breweries, kitchens, and storehouses become part of the engineering system. Toolmakers prepare pounders, chisels, wedges, baskets, sledges, ropes, mallets, measuring cords, and wooden supports. Woodcutters may travel far if timber is scarce. Rope makers twist fibre into long lines that must hold under strain. Cooks grind grain, bake bread, prepare stews, dry fish or meat, carry water, and keep bodies functioning. The stone appears to be the main burden, but the hidden burden is the entire economy bending around it. Ancient labour was not one thing. In some societies, workers may have been seasonal participants fulfilling community obligations. In others, they were corvée labourers owing service to a state. Some were specialists attached to temples, palaces, or royal workshops. Some may have been enslaved or coerced, though the details vary widely across cultures and periods. Some likely took pride in the task, especially when construction was tied to sacred duty, community identity, or state reward. Others may have endured it because refusal was dangerous or impossible. Modern categories do not always fit ancient systems neatly, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the bodies doing the work were real. Monumentality could inspire devotion and impose suffering at the same time. The quarry workers faced some of the hardest conditions. Quarrying is not elegant labour. It is dust, heat, cold, echoing blows, sharp fragments, and repetitive strain. A worker pounding hard stone does not shape a monument in a single heroic gesture. He or she changes the rock through thousands of impacts, each one small, each one tiring. Stone chips can cut skin and eyes, dust can fill the lungs, tools can shatter, hands can swell. A mistake in the quarry can ruin weeks of work, and a crack discovered late can turn effort into waste. The unfinished stones left in ancient quarries are not just technical clues, they are records of disappointment. Somewhere behind each abandoned block is labour that did not become glory. Transport could be even more dangerous because it placed many workers near a moving mass. A stone on a sledge may seem controlled until it shifts. A rope may seem strong until fibres fail. A downhill slope may seem helpful until the load begins to run. Workers pulling in front are vulnerable to sudden movement. Workers guiding from the sides risk being crushed if the block turns. Those behind may be assigned to restrain the load, a task that requires courage because gravity has no sympathy. The evidence rarely preserves accident reports, but the physics of the work makes injury nearly certain across the centuries. Bruised ribs, broken feet, torn muscles, crushed hands, rope burns, falls, heat exhaustion, and death must have belonged to the hidden history of monumental stone. Even successful movement damages bodies slowly. Hauling a stone for days or weeks is not only a matter of dramatic effort at a single moment, it is waking, eating, pulling, resting, repairing, pulling again, and repeating the cycle until the root becomes memory in the legs. Workers may have slept in temporary camps, exposed to weather, insects, poor sanitation, and crowded conditions. They may have been far from home during seasonal labour periods. They may have missed planting, harvesting, family rituals, or ordinary village tasks. A monument compresses these absences into stone. It stands because other parts of life were interrupted. There is also the psychological cost of coordinated danger. When hundreds of people pull together, one person's mistake can affect many. If a chant, drumbeat, or signal keeps rhythm, then rhythm becomes safety. If a foreman misjudges the slope, a whole team may suffer. If a rope breaks, panic can spread faster than command. The workers must trust the people beside them, the leaders directing them, and the materials holding the load. That trust may be earned through experience or enforced through hierarchy. Either way, moving stone is social pressure made physical. The group must become one machine, but every part of that machine is a vulnerable body. Specialists carried their own burdens. Surveyors and planners had to make decisions whose consequences could be enormous. A poorly chosen route could trap a stone. A misjudged foundation could make a wall unstable. A wrongly cut block could fail during transport. Skilled stonecutters had to understand both the material and the desired final form. Carpenters had to build devices strong enough to bear loads that could destroy them. Rope makers had to produce lines reliable enough for human lives to depend on. These people may have held status, but status did not remove risk. In many ancient projects, expertise meant being responsible for dangers that others could see only when something went wrong. Food offers one of the clearest ways to glimpse the workers as people, rather than an anonymous force. At some major construction sites, Archaeological evidence of animal bones, bread production, beer, fish, grain, or temporary settlements shows that feeding labourers was an organised task. This detail is less glamorous than a polished stone face, but it is essential. A worker who is badly fed cannot haul well, a crew without water becomes useless. A project without kitchens fails before its engineering begins. The builders of great monuments understood this, whether through state ration systems or communal feasts. Bread, beer, stew, dried meat, fish, onions, grain, and water may have moved more stone than any single tool because they kept the human engine alive. The human cost was not always only pain. Monument work could also create identity, pride, and social connection. A young worker might learn skills from elders. A community might gather for labour that was also ritual. A crew might gain a name, a reputation, or special treatment. In Egypt, worker gangs could have identities and organisation that suggest more than faceless toil. In prehistoric Europe, communal building may have been bound to feasts and gatherings. In the Andes, labour service could connect local communities to imperial systems of redistribution and obligation. Scholars still debate the balance between coercion and participation in many contexts. But it is important to hold both possibilities together. Ancient workers were not merely victims, and they were not merely volunteers in a romantic communal dream. They lived inside social worlds where duty, belief, pressure, and pride could overlap. The families behind the workers also paid part of the cost. A person called away for quarrying, hauling, road preparation, or construction leaves work undone elsewhere. Someone else must tend fields, animals, children, elders, fires, and household repairs. If labour is seasonal, communities may plan around it, but planning does not erase burden. Monument building is never limited to the site itself. It reaches back into homes, granaries, and fields. The great stone becomes a public object built from private disruptions. In some cases, the cost may have been justified by redistribution. A ruler or temple that gathers labour may also provide food, clothing, protection, festival goods, or prestige. A community that builds a tomb may strengthen claims to land and ancestors. A sacred project may reassure people that cosmic or social order is being maintained. This is why it is too simple to call every monument wasteful. Ancient societies did not always separate practical survival from ritual effort. To honour ancestors, please gods, display unity, or legitimise rule could be seen as necessary work. The question is not whether monuments were useful in a modern economic sense. The question is what kind of world they helped hold together. Still, the imbalance remains. The rulers' names are more likely to survive than the workers' names. The sacred meaning is more likely to be remembered than the injuries. The finished stone receives admiration, while the hands that moved it dissolve into the category of labour. This is one of the oldest patterns in monumental history. Power turns human effort into architecture. Then architecture turns power into memory. The individual worker is absorbed by the wall, the platform, the circle. The statue, the tomb. Some traces resist that erasure. A tool mark made by a particular hand, though unnamed, still carries motion. A repaired bone from a worker cemetery may reveal a hard life endured. A camp hearth shows someone eating near the work. A footprint hardened in ancient mud, where preserved, brings the scale suddenly down to a human step. A stone abandoned on a route suggests a day when effort stopped. These fragments do not restore full biographies, but they prevent the monument from becoming abstract. They remind us that impossible stones were moved by people with bodies like ours, though trained by worlds very different from ours. The human cost gives the stones their deepest gravity. Without it, they are only heavy objects. With it, they become records of social choice. A society decided that this work mattered enough to spend bodies on it. That decision could be beautiful, coercive, sacred, arrogant, communal, exploitative, visionary, or all of these at once. No single explanation fully accounts for the human experience behind every monument, but every impossible stone contains a hidden crowd. It contains those who planned, those who pulled, those who cooked, those who cut, those who watched, those who were injured, those who were proud, those who had no choice, and those who never saw the finished work. The stone survives because it is durable. The body disappears because it is not. That contrast lies at the heart of ancient monument building. Human beings used their brief strength to raise materials that could outlast memory itself. They gave years, seasons, muscles, and sometimes lives to objects that would never know fatigue. And when later ages stand in awe before those stones, the first act of understanding is not to ask how impossible the block appears. It's to remember that its true weight was carried by human beings. The knowledge that moved impossible stones did not vanish all at once. It faded the way many human skills fade unevenly, locally, and often without anyone realizing that a chain was being broken. A monument might stand for centuries after the people who understood its construction were gone. A quarry road might remain visible long after no one remembered where it led. A sacred platform might still receive offerings after the original stone-moving methods have become irrelevant. Technical memory rarely dies in a dramatic moment. It thins. It becomes the knowledge of fewer specialists. It survives in habit rather than explanation. Then a war, a famine, a new religion, a political collapse, a forest cleared too far, or a change in the economy interrupts the people who carried it. and a method that once seemed ordinary becomes mysterious to the descendants of those who used it. This is one reason ancient stone monuments appear so detached from their makers. The finished object is durable, but the institutions that created it are fragile. A pyramid survives longer than the royal administration that organised the crews. A megalithic tomb survives longer than the rituals that gave meaning to its chamber. A moai survives longer than the social world that carved, moved, raised, toppled, and reinterpreted it. An Inca wall survives longer than the imperial labour system that could mobilise people across mountains. The stone remains in place, but the human network around it changes. Once that network breaks, later observers inherit the result without the process. Political collapse is one of the strongest forces in this loss. Large monuments often depend on organised authority, whether royal, imperial, priestly, or communal. When that authority weakens, the flow of labour and resources changes. Quarries are abandoned, roads are no longer maintained, storehouses empty, specialist crews disperse, a ruler's successor may no longer care about the same project, a sacred centre may lose its sponsors. In Egypt, monument building continues in different forms for thousands of years, but the scale and style shift with the strength of the state, access to resources, and religious priorities. In the Andes, the Spanish conquest disrupts not only rulers, but the entire political and ritual structure that supported imperial construction. The stones remain, but the system that made them move is transformed beyond recognition. Religious change can erase methods by erasing reasons. A technique survives when people need it. If a community no longer builds passage tombs, the specific skills for selecting, moving, roofing, and sealing such tombs may slowly disappear. If a society stops raising ancestor statues, the quarrying and transport knowledge tied to those statues becomes less useful. If a new religion condemns older sacred places, the old stonework may be neglected, reused, buried, broken, or stripped for building material. The builder's descendants may still know how to move heavy objects in ordinary ways, but not at the same ceremonial scale. The lost knowledge is not always the physics. It is the social reason to apply the physics so intensely. Environmental change also matters. Many stone-moving systems depend on materials that are not stone: timber, rope fibre, water, packed earth, draft animals where available, navigable rivers, and seasonal conditions all shape what can be done. If forests shrink, large sledges, rollers, levers, scaffolds, or boats become harder to build. If a river course shifts, a quarry loses its transport route. If soil erodes or wetlands expand, old paths become unusable. On islands, ecological pressure can change the cost of monument building dramatically. On mountains, landslides or earthquakes can alter routes. What survives in the record suggests that ancient methods were often highly adapted to particular landscapes. When the landscape changes, the method may no longer fit. Economic change can be just as powerful. Monumental stonework requires surplus. It requires food beyond immediate survival, labour that can be diverted from daily production, and social mechanisms for gathering tools and people. If trade declines, harvests fail, population falls, or political taxation weakens, the ability to organise large projects may disappear even if the technical knowledge remains. A master stoneworker cannot move a giant block alone. A planner cannot raise an obelisk without workers, ropes, wood, food, and time. Technical skill is only one part of capability. The rest is economic support. When that support collapses, knowledge becomes stranded. Sometimes knowledge fades because new technologies make old skills unnecessary. Iron tools, improved lifting devices, different architectural styles, brick construction, concrete, mortar, cranes, and later machines change how people build. A society may stop using massive monoliths not because it has become less capable, but because it has better, cheaper, or more flexible alternatives. Roman concrete, for example, allows vast architectural forms that do not depend entirely on moving huge single stones. Smaller cut blocks, brick, vaulting, and mortar can solve problems differently. When building habits change, older methods become specialised, then archaic, then legendary. Progress can create forgetting. There is also the loss caused by ordinary reuse. Ancient stones are valuable. Later people quarry old monuments because the hard work has already been done. A dressed block in an abandoned temple is easier to reuse than a fresh stone in a distant quarry. Across the world, monuments have been stripped for walls, roads, churches, mosques, houses, lime kilns, and fortifications. This reuse destroys evidence of construction. It removes context. It breaks stones away from their original positions and turns sacred architecture into practical material. The loss is often not malicious. It is economical. A farmer, builder, or ruler in a later age may see no reason to preserve an ancient monument whose meaning has faded. Stone that once carried eternity becomes a convenient building supply. Writing, when it exists, does not always preserve what modern people want to know. Ancient texts often celebrate rulers, gods, victories, offerings, or sacred purposes rather than explaining the exact angle of a ramp or the knot used in a hauling rope. Technical details may have been too ordinary to record. Specialists may have guarded knowledge within workshops. Administrative documents may mention deliveries and crews, but not the physical method in full, in societies without writing. The problem is deeper still. Knowledge lives in demonstration. It is taught by doing. Once the doing stops, the archive disappears. The evidence remains incomplete because the most important record was often the trained body. This is why later generations sometimes created stories about giants. They were not always foolish. They were noticing a real discontinuity. A community looking at a monument without the labour system that built it might reasonably feel that ordinary people could not have done such work. In a way, they were correct about themselves. Their own society may no longer have had the organisation, motive, or technical tradition to repeat the achievement. The error was assuming that the builders had not been ordinary human beings either. The monument became impossible because the conditions that made it possible had passed away. Some knowledge may have survived in reduced forms. Farmers know how to move large field stones. Builders know how to use levers. Sailors know rope and tension. Quarry workers know cracks and bedding planes. Carpenters know load and balance. Ritual specialists know sacred geography. These fragments continue, but the grand combination may be lost. Moving an impossible stone requires many forms of knowledge to meet at the same time. If they separate, the whole method disappears even while pieces remain alive. A later society may still have ropes, but no reason to gather 500 pullers. It may still have quarrymen, but no state to feed them. It may still have sacred places, but no tradition of raising monoliths. Loss can be a failure of combination. Abandoned monuments make this process visible. A half-built temple, an unfinished obelisk, a statue left on a road, a quarry filled with rough blocks, a wall whose planned extension never comes. These are places where intention stopped. Sometimes the cause is visible, like a crack in stone. More often it is hidden in history. A ruler died, a dynasty collapsed, a war redirected labour, a new cult rose, a famine emptied the workforce, a conquest severed administration. The stone remains at the moment where the old system failed to carry it forward. Such places are strangely moving because they show that permanence itself depends on temporary human arrangements. The fading of knowledge also changes how monuments are perceived. A stone circle may become a place of fear. A ruined temple may become the work of demons. A massive wall may be attributed to giants. A statue may be seen as an idol, ancestor, curiosity, or obstacle depending on the age. Meaning shifts because living memory no longer holds it steady. The monument survives, but its explanation migrates. Each generation lays a new story over the old stone. And sometimes those later stories become part of the site's history too. The original builders are not the only people who give meaning to monuments. Time keeps adding interpreters. Modern archaeology tries to reverse this forgetting, but only partly. It can map quarries, analyse tool marks, date charcoal, study settlement remains, identify stone sources, reconstruct routes, model loads, and test transport methods. It can show that ancient builders used humanly possible techniques, but it cannot fully restore the vanished world of instruction. It cannot hear the work songs with certainty. It cannot know every command, fear, ritual, or joke. It cannot always tell whether a stone moved in a single season or over many years. It cannot rebuild the entire mental world that made the effort worthwhile. What it can do is replace careless wonder with informed wonder. The knowledge faded because it was never only knowledge. It was a living relationship among people, tools, institutions, landscapes, and beliefs. Remove one part, and the method weakens. Remove enough parts, and later generations see only the stone. This is the fate of many ancient achievements. The durable result outlives the fragile conditions that produced it. The monument becomes a survivor without its original society. Yet the fading is not total. Every tool mark, quarry trench, ramp trace, unfinished block, worker camp, road, socket, wedge hole, and fitted joint preserves a fragment of the old intelligence. The stones still teach, but slowly. They show that ancient builders learned through doing, that their methods belong to place, and that their greatest achievements were not isolated tricks but whole systems of life. The knowledge may have faded, but it did not vanish into nothing. It remains scattered in the earth, waiting to be read with patience, like a broken instruction written in weight. The stones that still remember do not remember in words. They remember through position, weight, weathering, fracture, and endurance. They remember the quarry scar where a block was cut free, the road where it dragged across earth, the socket that held it upright, the joint where it met another stone so closely that time could not easily enter. They remember by remaining. Long after the workers are gone, long after the first songs and commands fade, long after the rulers, priests, ancestors, and builders lose their names. The stones keep their places in the world. They become witnesses without speech, and because they do not speak, every age must decide how to listen. Across the ancient world, these stones form a scattered archive of human ambition. In Egypt, they rise from the desert as pyramids, obelisks, statues, and temple walls, still carrying the discipline of a river civilization that learned to turn flood cycles, quarry systems, food stores, and royal belief into architecture. In Atlantic Europe, they stand in circles, alignments, and tomb chambers, holding the memory of communities whose written voices never survived but whose gatherings reshaped whole landscapes. On Rapa Nui, they face inland with the solemn authority of ancestors, showing how an island society could carve identity from volcanic stone and move it across a bounded world. In the Andes, they lock together in mountain walls, fitted with patience against earthquakes, slope, and sacred geography, at Baalbek. They lie in a platform and in quarries like fragments of a human attempt to make building feel geological. The places differ, but the deeper impulse repeats to make meaning heavy enough to survive forgetting. What these monuments leave behind is not proof of one universal technology, but proof of many local intelligences. Each society answers the same basic challenge with different materials, landscapes, and social systems. Some use rivers, some use roads, some use sledges across sand, some use ramps against height, some use teams rocking statues upright, some use quarries so close to the site that the problem becomes not distance but control. Some build for kings, some for ancestors, some for gods, or some for communities whose exact structure remains debated. The evidence remains incomplete, and it always will, because so much of the machinery of stone movement was temporary. Yet the surviving pattern is strong enough. Ancient people did not need to break the laws of nature, they needed to understand them through experience and bend their lives around them. There is a kind of humility in this recognition. Modern technology can move heavier things more quickly, and yet speed can make effort invisible. A crane lifts in minutes what an ancient crew might have struggled with for months. But the ancient method leaves a different kind of mark. It turns labour into ritual, logistics into social order, and patience into force. These monuments remind the modern world that technology is not only metal and engines, it can also be coordination. It can be rope made correctly, a surface prepared at the right moisture, a route chosen with care, a lever placed at the right point, a community fed at the right season, a quarry worker hearing a dangerous change in the sound of stone. The ancient world's machines were often made from bodies, landscapes, and memory. The stones also remember failure. That may be their most human lesson. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan, the abandoned giants in the quarries near Baalbek, the fallen or stranded Moai on Rapa Nui roads, the blocks left along Andean routes, the incomplete monuments whose plans vanished before completion, all of them show that ancient builders lived inside limits. They misjudged, they adapted, they abandoned, they tried again. This is important because it rescues the builders from both extremes. They were neither helpless primitives nor flawless magicians. They were people with expertise, ambition, pressure, and vulnerability. Their monument survived not because every plan succeeded, but because enough plans succeeded to change the landscape. Their legacy is therefore not only architectural, it is social. The stones reveal that human beings can organise around shared imagination. They can take an idea that exists only in belief, fear, grief, authority, or hope, and make it visible through matter. A tomb is not only a chamber, it is a claim that the dead still matter. An obelisk is not only a shaft, it is a vertical argument with time. A stone circle is not only an arrangement, it is a place where people gathered beneath the sky and gave order to their world. A fitted wall is not only defence or structure, it is proof that hands can make irregular nature behave as pattern. A giant platform is not only foundation, it is power made into ground. And yet, the stones do not preserve everything. They preserve the result better than the reason. They preserve the grandeur better than the exhaustion. They preserve the ruler's ambition more easily than the worker's name. They preserve the outline of belief, but not always its voice. This is why they remain mysterious even when engineering explanations are strong. Archaeology can show how a block may have moved, but not always how it felt to watch it move. It can reconstruct a route. But not the private fear of a worker standing beside the load. It can identify a quarry, but not the first moment someone looked at that stone and imagined it standing somewhere else. The human interior of the project is the hardest part to recover. Still, enough survives to change the way the ancient builders should be seen. They were not waiting for modernity to make them clever. They lived in worlds where knowledge was practical, inherited, and deeply tied to place. They knew their quarries, fibres, timbers, seasons, rivers, slopes, and ceremonies. They could mobilise labour through states, villages, rituals, obligations, feasts, and fear. They could make simple tools behave with surprising power because they understood repetition. They could divide impossible tasks into possible stages. What survives in the record suggests not a single lost age of superhuman technology, but many cultures capable of astonishing discipline. The stones still stand because they were meant to outlast ordinary time, but they now outlast even the meanings that first raised them. That is their final irony. Built to preserve memory, they often become memory's last container after memory itself has leaked away. Later generations come to them with new languages, new religions, new theories, new doubts, and new machines. Some come to measure, some come to worship, some come to sell legends, some come quietly. Feeling only that something very old has touched the present. The stones accept all of this without changing their expression. In the end, the ancient builders who moved impossible stones left behind more than monuments. They left behind a challenge to the imagination, not the shallow challenge of asking whether humans could have done it, but the deeper challenge of understanding what humans become capable of when belief, labour, landscape, and time converge. The stones remember that patience can become strength. They remember that communities can become engines. They remember that fragile bodies can move durable matter when enough purpose gathers behind them. They remember that civilizations disappear, but their heaviest dreams can remain standing in the wind. And after all the movement, after the quarry dust, the ropes, the sledges, the ramps, the rivers, the chants, the meals, the commands, the failures, and the long days under sun or mountain cloud, the The stones grow quiet. They no longer strain against the earth, they no longer slide forward inch by inch, they no longer wait at the edge of a quarry road while workers gather their strength. They simply remain, settled into the landscapes that once received them. Time moves around them in ways their builders could not control. Sand gathers at the base of pyramids, grass grows around standing stones, rain darkens the walls of mountain cities, salt wind touches island statues, earthquakes shake old masonry and test joints fitted by hands long vanished. Empires rise nearby and pass away. Languages change, roads are buried. Sacred places become ruins, then puzzles, then heritage, then places where strangers arrive with cameras, measurements, and questions the first builders never imagined. Yet the stones keep a slower rhythm. They do not explain themselves quickly. They ask for patience, the same patience that made them possible. They remind us that the past is not a simple darkness behind the modern world, but a long field of human skill, loss, adaptation, and desire. The people who moved them had no engines, but they had memory. They had no steel cranes, but they had hands trained by repetition. They had no complete certainty, but they had a reason strong enough to begin. Perhaps that is why these monuments still hold attention. They stand at the edge between the known and the unknowable. The engineering can be studied, the stone can be weighed, the quarry can be found, the route can sometimes be traced, but the full human moment, the breath before the first pull, the silence when a crack appeared, the relief when a stone settled into place remains just beyond reach. So the ancient stones stay where they are, carrying both evidence and absence. They are heavy with geology, heavy with labour, heavy with belief, and heavy with everything time has taken away. In their stillness, they offer one final image: human beings gathered around a piece of the earth, deciding that it must move, and somehow, slowly, together, making it move.